Good morning.
Check.
Good morning.
We're going to get going in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes to start. We'll just wish everyone in the gallery a good morning. Yeah. Good morning to the press corps, Elise. Good morning, team communications. Good morning, team clerks. Good morning, team legal. Good morning, team planning. Good morning, colleagues. Special warm welcome this morning to Robert Sandercott. Thanks for joining us. We'll get going in about a minute. Good morning, everyone. I'll assume Catherine will be back in just a moment. Welcome to the Planning and Housing Committee meeting number 16. I want to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence sont enrichies et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. I'll ask Kelly to do the roll call, please.
Councillor Brockington. Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor Dudas.
Here.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Here.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Counselor Kitts, Counselor Lowe,
Here.
Counselor Tierney, Counselor Truster,
Here.
Vice Chair Gower,
Here.
and Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you very much. So this is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 4.1 to 4.3 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on October the 11th, 2023, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Nope. Are the minutes of the PHC meeting 15, Wednesday, September 20th, 2023 confirmed? Thank you. Running through the agenda, the first item is going to be the 200 Clearview OPA and zoning bylaw. We have a presentation from staff. The applicants are here and there are 5 delegations to speak to us as well. We've also received correspondence on that item, so we will hold it. Item 4.2 is the zoning bylaw amendment on Hawthorne. We're going to receive a presentation from staff. The applicants are present and there are 3 delegations to speak to the item, so we're going to hold that. There is the zoning bylaw amendment, aligning the zoning bylaw with Bill 23. There are 3 delegations on that, and I've also asked for a presentation, so we'll be holding that item. The Ottawa Community Lands Development Corporation, the 2022 annual report. I have asked staff to make a presentation on that because I think many members may not yet be familiar with the OLDC and may want to ask questions. So we'll receive a presentation on that item. So we'll hold it. And then we'll move into the status update, Planning and Housing Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending September 15th. Is that received? Thank you. All right, so moving back, the first item that we have is the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment at 200 Clearview Avenue in beautiful Mississippi Ward. I will ask first staff to make a presentation on this. We'll move into an opportunity for the applicants to speak, and then we'll move into the public delegations before moving into questions of staff by members. And of course, as delegations are going, members of committee will have an opportunity to ask questions of the delegations as they go, should they choose. Andrew and John, we're in your hands.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm John Bernier. I'm with the Planning, Real Estate and Economic Development Department. And as mentioned, today we're going to discuss the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment to permit the development of a 25-story apartment building containing 184 units. Next slide, please. So in terms of context, the site is located within the Westboro Beach neighborhood. The Kitchie Zibi McCann Parkway is to the north and the Ottawa River beyond this. And of note, the Westboro Transit Station, which is a future LRT station, is approximately 200 meters to the south. And Richmond Road is approximately 550 meters south of the property, which you can see here in this orange line. Next slide, please. So zooming in a little bit, the site is 1.1 hectares. I believe in my report I mentioned it's 11.7 hectares. It's a typo, so 1.1. It's a rectangular lot with frontages on Lanark Avenue, Ellendale Crescent, and Clearview Avenue. The Centre Jules Léger School shares a property line to the west of the site. The school's parking lot is presently abutting the lot line. And there are multiple high rises in the vicinity, and the transit station can be seen at the bottom of this image. The site enjoys direct access to the station via pathway immediately south of the site. Next slide, please. The site is within the boundaries of the Richmond Road Westboro secondary plan in the Westboro Beach Planning Sector 6. The image displayed here is Schedule C of the plan with the maximum heights identified. So just quickly, dark brown is 10 plus stories, orange is 4 to 6 stories, and beige is the maximum of 4 stories. And the site in question, identified here with the star, is unidentified. Next slide, please. So the site currently has a variety of zoning designations applicable, and that reflects a previous development proposal for the site. The open space designations were reflective of a Hydro 1 corridor, which is no longer needed. Next slide, please. So here is that current previous development schedule 216, which was for a mid-rise apartment building. And this was developed quite a number of years ago. Next slide, please. So the proposal seeks to rezone the property to R5C with exception and replace the height schedule 216. The proposed exception will allow relief from permitted projections, section 64 and 65, above the height limits for elements such as balconies and awnings and rooftop equipment. Typically an exception or an item that's added whenever there's a height schedule. And it also will include an increase in the number of required bicycle parking spaces to a minimum of 1 per unit, a ratio that greatly exceeds the present zoning requirements. And also, I'd like to mention that the site plan presently has a greater rate than that. We just want to secure a 1-to-1 ratio to support active transit. And it also, the exception will provide relief from table 55, subsection 8, to allow the outdoor amenity area to extend to the edge of the building, whereas 1.5 meter setback is required. Next slide, please. So Schedule 216 will identify the minimum yard setbacks, minimum building step backs, and maximum building heights, effectively shrink wrapping the site plan proposal. Or the site plan that was submitted with this application. Next slide, please. So the proposal will amend the Richmond Road Westboro secondary plan height schedule C shown previously. The southern portion of the site will be 10 or more stories in height, shown as area B here. And the northern portion of the site will be a maximum of 4 stories. Next slide, please. The site is within the interurban transect policy area and is designated as an evolving neighborhood. So the interurban transect, this plan focuses on creating or enhancing urban forms and mixed-use areas that prioritize walking, cycling, and transit, while generally advocating for mid to high-density development in accordance with transit access, infrastructure capacity, and suitable building scales. The evolving neighborhood overlay, this is a designation generally favors low-rise development, but allows for greater heights based on pre-existing zoning, secondary plans, or local context, while also aiming to support 15-minute neighborhoods. Next slide. The site is within the Westboro Beach sector 6. And greatest heights were intended to be located along transit stations. Greater heights are permitted as long as they are compatible with adjacent low-rise. And there's a number of criteria that developments must meet in order to be considered compatible. Next slide, please. So the above image is that site plan that I had mentioned. The garage access is from Clearview Avenue to the north, and the waste collection and move-in areas access from Lanark Avenue to the south. The underground parking will contain a total of 236 parking spaces, in addition to 9 outdoor parking spaces. 90 spaces will be allotted to the existing apartment building, which is pictured here on the east side, which will have direct transfer, or sorry, these 90 parking spaces will be a direct transfer from the surface parking to the garage, and will be for the sole use of those existing residents. And 125 spaces are provided for the proposed development. I'll just mention, a shared garage was contemplated initially. However, a hydro easement bisects the property, shown as a thin red rectangle in the middle here. Next slide. So here's a perspective view from Lanark Avenue looking east of the building. We'll linger on that for a moment. And next slide. And here are various perspectives of the proposed development shown in full color, existing buildings in white, and planned heights shown conceptually, sort of ghosted out. Clockwise from the top left, just to give you an idea of which direction you're looking in. So clockwise top left is northwest, then northeast, southeast, and then looking southwest. And I'll mention that this also is a good view of the high rises in the area. Next slide, please. So in sum, the proposal is consistent with the applicable official plan, secondary plan policies, and meets the intent of the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll have opportunities to ask questions of staff after the public delegations. I would invite Paul and the development team to come up and talk to us for 5 minutes. Good morning, Mr. Black.
Morning.
When you're ready.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Paul Black. I'm a associate planner at Foten Plan Design. Here today representing Homestead, who are the landowners for this site. Homestead is on the line on Zoom. Mark Brule, Jack Mangan, and Nick Higginson joining us this morning. So first, I want to thank Mr. Bernier for his presentation. It was very thorough, and I won't likely take my whole 5 minutes, but I did want to just highlight a couple of things. Next slide, please. So as Mr. Bernier outlined, the site is approximately 325 meters walking distance from Westboro Station, which, as you all know, is being converted currently from a BRT station to LRT as part of Stage 2 West Extension. The location of the high-rise building, surrounded by other high-rise developments in the neighborhood, is in keeping with the provincial policy statement and official plan objectives for intensification and proximity to transit and existing services. Next slide, please. So just again, to highlight a few of the aspects of the development, it's 25-story residential apartment building. It does sit on a property where an existing 26-story apartment building is today, addressed as 200 Clearview. The existing building has 224 units, while the new building will have 184 units. The new building has a 25-story tower with a 3- and 4-story podium. So the building is located generally on the south side of the property, providing a 35-meter setback to Clearview Avenue to the north, and some low-rise that exists on the north side of Clearview, and providing a 20-meter setback to Lanark Avenue and the low-rise that exists on the south side of Lanark. As Mr. Bernier outlined, the parking on the site is being reorganized through the redevelopment. The existing surface parking area, which contains around 100 parking spots, is being relocated underground as part of the redevelopment. And the overall parking rate on site will be reduced slightly from 0.94 spaces per unit to 0.87 spaces per unit. Both of which are well in line and keeping with the maximum parking permitted around transit stations and also meeting the minimum requirements from the zoning bylaw. As was outlined, proposed bike parking is currently at 1.1 space per unit, also exceeding the bylaw requirement of 0.5 spaces. And then Homestead is also agreed to the 1 space per unit as proposed in the zoning bylaw amendment. Next slide, please. So Mr. Bernier outlined the 2 amendments, but the first is the official plan amendment, which is to address the height schedule of the secondary plan, which doesn't currently assign a maximum height to the subject property. The proposal obviously is for 25 stories and to, as Mr. Bernier outlined, to permit that height on the south side of the site. The zoning bylaw amendment would be to clean up the zoning from the previous development scheme that never moved forward to permit the proposed development and to, again, prescribe the location of the tower, the overall size of the tower, and the setbacks from the adjacent properties to the north and south, as well as ensuring the appropriate separation to the existing tower to the east, currently around 38 meters. And to the property line to the west, to the Jules Léger Center, which is 10 meters currently, meeting the zoning bylaw requirements. Through public consultation, we heard comments about the parking garage access, which, as Mr. Bernier noted, we did explore the opportunity to combine the garage access with the existing garage access, but because of an easement on the property, there's no possibility to connect the existing garage to the new garage. And so the proposed driveway access is from Clearview Avenue with loading happening from Lanark Avenue on the south side. Next slide, please. We also explored the tower footprint and size orientation. The tower, as I mentioned, is 38 meters from 200 Clearview, the west side of 200 Clearview Avenue. It does have a floor plate just under 750 square meters above the 5th floor, and features, as I've noted, large step backs and setbacks from the adjacent properties to ensure an appropriate transition to the surrounding context. Subject to any questions, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking for questions from members and don't see any. I will just ask, the placement of the tower is obviously, as you said, to the south. The zoning, as John said, is kind of shrink wrapped, so that would be the location that we lock in if we approve this zoning today. We've got members who I recognize from the apartment tower who would prefer that the bulk of the tower be to the north. We've received letters from the folks in the townhomes insisting that the tower be positioned further to the south. Why the south side as opposed to the north? Is there a good planning rationale for doing that?
I mean, I think the most obvious is the proximity to the transit station. And I know we're talking 20 meters, 30 meters closer to the station, but the tower shifting south moves the main entrance of the building south, which makes the access to transit that much more convenient. The original zoning on the site did contemplate a mid-rise building, as you've heard. That was also located on the south side of the property. And so we took our cues from that. In terms of orientation of the tower, shadowing, separation, we looked at all of those things through the applications, and it was our opinion that the proposed location was the best location in terms of mitigating those impacts on all adjacent properties. So not sort of, I guess, assessing the impacts on each of those different surrounding landowners and determining the best location for the tower to not result in any undue impact on any one property more than others.
Okay. Members have any further questions?
Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. We'll move on to the public delegations. Stephen Andrews is our first delegate this morning. Is Mr. Andrews online or is he here? Good morning, Stephen. We can see you now. We can't hear you, however.
Because I had my mic manually muted as well, just to double ensure I wasn't interfering too much.
We can hear you, Stephen, and you have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Okay, I do have slides as well. Thank you. Okay, so some of what I've going to be covered was touched back on the presentation given by the previous people. I am a resident of the west side of 200 Clearview, so obviously I have a bit of a vested interest in why the towers on the south side that basically is going to completely annihilate the privacy of the 52 some units that have their living rooms and living areas facing that. I did provide community feedback on that, and I do have a particular point with respect to policy 9 in 4.6.6 of the official plan. And it basically, the feedback that I noted is that the plan requires that a multi-factor assessment be done to ensure that the privacy, lighting, and views for the residents are maintained to the best of their ability. Next slide, please. And in this factor, it's to achieve maximum separation distance, and that the responsibility is going to be shared equally by everybody in the community. And right now it feels like the west side of 200 Clearview is going to be thrown under the bus with this orthogonal placement of the tower, and the future residents of the tower are going to be basically looking into my living room as I look into theirs. Next slide, please. Maximum is the very important word here, and this is where I feel like my feedback was not quite articulated or considered in quite the point that I was trying to make. Maximum was chosen by council in the official plan for a reason. They didn't set minimum standards for privacy or lighting or sky views. They said that when you have when you have a piece of land like this and you have options to consider multiple placements of things like towers and shapes and sizes, you do so in a way that maximizes these three factors. And so maximum is not the same as meeting the minimum standard of 23 meters separation distance. It's about looking at, okay, we need at least 23 meters, but if we can do better, we're going to do better. Next slide, please. So in considering how you maximize something, you have to consider the alternatives. And when we look at what was done in considering the alternatives, in the planning rationale that was submitted, an alternative, a 12-story basically box-like building was considered and then dismissed by the applicant. And as we've heard here by the applicant just recently, they did consider alternatives. They did apparently form an opinion on what those alternatives was, and they decided that this was the best one. But when asked and pressed for the documentation with respect to how they came to that conclusion, that this maximizes those three factors, crickets. They just said, take our word for it. It's our opinion. Trust me, bro. And so in terms of the alternatives proposed, next slide, please. Some of them that I raised in my feedback that I'm just trying to get a discussion going on making sure that this is the best shape and size of the tower and where it's placed in that. So if we look at this shrink wrapping of the site plan, my question is, why can't we just kick consideration of where that tower is to site plan? North of the tower, obviously the residents in the north of the community are going to have a problem with that. But a tower footprint where the tower is rotated so that it's a narrower on the east-west sides, it's more centrally located. You adjust the height down so that and raise the podium so you keep the same cubic meters. That would move it to be diagonal to 200 Clearview and restore the privacy of the people's living area, while at the same time balancing the burden that this development is going to have on the rest of the community. Next slide, please. So my solution here is I'm not hammering my hand on the table saying, stop the brakes, we can't do this at all, don't do this at all. It would be nice to have had these discussions beforehand. I flagged it in December that this is an issue. We should have discussions on this, and we didn't do it, so we're here now. But we can still move forward and say, hey, this is a good idea. This fits with the idea of having intensification and meeting Ottawa's intensification goals and having people near transit. But let's
Stephen, thanks. Very clear, I think. Are there any questions from members? I don't see any. Thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Dan Stringer, representing the Island Park Towers Tenants Association. Good morning, Dan. When you're ready, you'll have 5 minutes
morning,
to present to the committee.
Last week, New York City received 1 month's rainfall in 4 hours. This year's forest fire season in Western Canada was the worst ever, with the resultant smoke actually pushing Canada's carbon emissions up even higher. Climate mitigation plans are fast becoming obsolete as climate change accelerates. Why then would you even think of approving a 25-story apartment building adjacent to a current floodplain and within a baseball's home run hit distance from one of the 100 longest rivers in the world with a huge catchment area? The Selby floodplain is 4 blocks from the proposed site and not 4 blocks away from the Ottawa River, but rather parallel to it. The river itself is only 3 blocks from the site, with the newly renamed Mississippi-Mekong Parkway the only barrier between. From the point of view of risk management, approving this building would be absurd. In the age of catastrophic climate disaster in which we are living, the possibility of unusual flooding along the Ottawa, the most obvious natural feature of our city, and I might add, a geological fault line, should be the most serious object of our mitigation planning. It is true that the city has a mitigation analysis. It is troubling, however, that only the moderate level of consequences of climate change to the flood zone were written up as an executive summary and therefore understandable by the public. The significant catastrophic level consequences are not readily available. Should we take that as a sign of how bad they are? That's what I think. More troubling is the head in the sand attitude of the city that it reveals, not having an open discussion on the catastrophic consequences is folly. It is fast becoming universally accepted urban planning policy not to build on a floodplain. Should it not also be policy not to build beside a floodplain? Why would you needlessly risk building on a potential floodplain so close to the river that could very likely result in safety and health traumas, if not death, increased insurance rates for tenants and owners, and liability for the city? Rather, it would be much better for this committee to be proactive and urge the council to promote the creation of a blue belt, similar to our green belt, around the shoreline of the Ottawa River on both sides of it. Such a blue belt would limit development like this one proposal today, protecting the river from the negative effects of urbanization, and Ottawa citizens from the force of nature. It's a safety issue. Speaking of green belts, we live in a time of a tale of two governments, one desperate for cities to solve their lack of foresight in immigration policy management, and the other caught in the sticky business of too cozy a relationship with some bad actors in the development industry. You are called to walk a tricky line between both of these cautionary tales. People have to live somewhere, you say. Certainly that's true, and I live in this potential flood zone that I'm speaking about. But nobody is talking about tearing down existing buildings. The issue is now, not when William Schachter was flying the Enterprise around the galaxy. The reality of now is not the post-Expo 67 era in which Island Park Towers was built. How in all conscience, knowing what we know today, can you build a high-rise tower there now? There is plenty of space for 10-story buildings along arterial routes and collector streets that have a bus service connecting to the LRT that does not require turning Westboro Village into a concrete jungle and then blaming it on the feds. Concrete jungles generate often costly social problems. This committee should postpone its decision until the city's own assessment of high-level catastrophic weather events on its flood zones is written up as an executive summary for all citizens to read. In the meantime, each of you should visit the Selby floodplain at the corner of Churchill Avenue North and Selby Avenue and reflect.
Thank you, Dan. I'll just see whether there are any questions for you, but I don't see any. No, that's okay. There are no further questions. Thank you very much for the presentation. Larry Cunningham will have our next presentation. Good morning, Larry. When you're ready, you'll have 5 minutes to address
Okay.
the committee.
Good morning. Next page of the slide. This presentation shows the apartment situation near 210 Clearview. The diagram was, I thought, readable, but is not all that readable. But we decided to produce it since most members are not from Westboro and may not be familiar with the community. The area displayed is bounded by the Ottawa River and the Parkway to the north, Island Park Drive to the east, and Broadview to the west, with Richmond Road running down the middle, and Byron to the south. At this point, I would like to apologize that I put the word Parkway on there and not the new name, which is Kitchissippi-Mikan. I apologize to anybody who has ancestral background or relations with them. The diagram displays the apartment situation. The existing apartments are shown in black, and there are 15 plus of them. This is a minimum number. I didn't count any apartments that were like 4 or 5 stories, just those that were bigger. Of the existing apartments, many have been built in the past few years and did not exist when Island Park Towers was developed. There are also some very large towers on the west end of Richmond Road between Golden and Byron. There are 6 apartment buildings under construction, and these are shown in orange. There are 9 planned apartments. These are shown in green. This is where application is made to the city and the sign is posted on the development and the number of apartments to be created. In my walk around, I also noticed there were other properties suitable for development, so there could be more future proposals coming. When I added up the numbers of new apartments, I was surprised to find out that I came to a figure of 1,500 apartment homes. And this is a minimum number because some of the signs were taken down and I didn't know what the estimate apartments were for them. This, to me, represents a significant increase in the density of Westboro. This will change the nature of Westboro from a low-density community to one that is higher. It appears that each new building application is assessed on a case-by-case basis or incrementalism. What is needed is to assess the overall impact of the total planned in this area over the next 10 to 15 years to assess the impact on the nature of the community of Westboro and the structural capacity that we will have to suffer with. I would like to point out that the Westboro Community Association also raised this point of assessing the overall capacity in the future. I would like to draw your attention now to the northern, the top part of the diagram, which is labeled IPT. This is for Island Park Towers. There are 3 existing towers that are shown in black, and the new proposed tower at 210 Clearview is shown in green. The 3 existing towers contain over 500 apartment homes. The plan is to construct an additional 185 apartments. The site in the document shows the site has 11.7 hectares, but this was corrected to 1.1 hectares. And constructing this apartment will increase the density of this already high dense area by 31%. We believe this is way too much and could lead to future safety and social problems. Thank you.
Larry, thank you for the presentation. Yeah, Councillor Troster has a question for you, Larry. Sorry.
Hi, sir. Thank you so much for coming. Both you and the delegate before, you can,
Yeah, sorry, Larry. The question is for you.
yeah, no problem. I just want to pick up because you and the previous delegate both mentioned higher density leading to
Okay,
social
sorry,
problems.
I didn't hear that.
Sorry, both you and the previous delegate mentioned higher density leading to social problems. I'm just wondering if you could explain what you mean there.
Okay, well, I'll provide an answer and then I'll ask my colleague. Okay, first of all, we have an association and we have a website, and it reports that there is vandalism and theft in the area. We do know that there is, I live in the 200 tower, which is very high, and there's a tremendous wind problem. And we have occasions where people have been blown over. And adding this additional tower will accentuate that. We have a high number of seniors living in the building, and they are vulnerable. I noticed a large number of people going out with walkers, and removing this parking lot, that's a place where they can go with their walkers without having to go on city streets. There is a large number of dog walkers. I would say just about every apartment has a comfort animal in it. And so there's an extremely large number of people moving around the building.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I mean, the only thing that I'll say is representing Somerset Ward and Centertown, which is a high density neighborhood. I personally feel safer with more neighbors around me. And in every case where we've turned a parking lot into housing, it has increased social cohesion rather than deteriorated it. But I just wanted to understand where your point was coming from. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions for the delegate. Larry, thank you. We will move to Betty Rogers. Good morning, Betty. Whenever you're ready, you'll have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Okay. I just needed to turn this off. I'm hearing impaired. I have cochlear implants. I couldn't get a word any of you said. I was listening on YouTube through Bluetooth and I was able to get it. Thank you for setting me up. So some of this stuff has already been said by the first speaker. So I just want to go and just quickly go over some points. So the reason I decided to make this presentation is because I believe there's two buildings or entities that are most affected by this proposal. 200 Clearview and the school for disabilities children. They're not even mentioned in this report. You're signing off that you're happy with the consultation report. We made a submission on the view and issues to whoever we're supposed to, and it wasn't included in the report. So I don't know how you sign off on it. But anyway, so that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that it was there. So I don't know, next slide, please. So basically, you know, 3 towers. They were built almost 60 years ago. These are wonderful towers. They have nice floor plans, real floor plans you can live in. As the first speaker said, and 200 has a wonderful view. And we have many retired seniors in there who basically, when they sell their houses, have sold their houses over the years, they've moved into those apartments. As I said, the proposal for 210 puts the new tower directly in front of the existing one. And again, the documents are silent on these impacts. And that's really distressed me. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so basically a sunshade analysis was done for the proposal. We have this tower now in front of it. 200 wasn't included in that analysis. There was no impact on. So under the proposal, okay, so basically that next slide, some of the stuff was gone over. Okay, so we tried to find an alternative. We are supportive of the need for housing, right? So I just want to do a little diagram that shows if you just shift it, well, or pivot, they said to pivot the whole thing. All that happens is it moves a very small amount to the right. And so the pivot options on the right, the existing designs on the left, and hey, we get sun, we get a view back. This is not a big thing. And yet the alternatives weren't considered and no rationale was given to us, even though we wrote in as to why they weren't considered. Oh, we know why now. Oh, well, there's a little bit more shade on the 36 units that are on the north side. Well, we lose our entire sun or light. No, we lose our entire view for that. So don't renters count? Anyway, why weren't we considered? If we had been condo owners in that tower, could we have been ignored? Is it a renter problem? And so I'm quite upset at this, obviously, so I better calm myself down. But anyway, I agree with the first speaker. We should not sign off today without looking at that option because it has such an impact on the people in 200 who are facing the river. Next slide. Okay, so a few other impacts. Charging of electric vehicles. None of these buildings in IPT have charging stations. No, it's not quite true. 200 now has about 90 people who park outside. And I think there are about 50 or so electrical outlets for those people who surface park. They're gone, right? They're underneath now. And IPT said, and no, Homestead said, and this blew me away, we cannot provide charging stations because the amount of hydro available won't support it. Well, what the hell does that mean? We don't have enough electricity to put in charging stations, but we do have enough electricity to build this huge 25-story tower. I'm sorry, but that didn't make any sense. And basically, I think we really have to look at this issue before this building is approved. Now, the next two, Larry mentioned wind impacts and people falling over. And then we were told, don't know if it's true, that it could affect access to a fire truck to the buildings. So please, I don't know this, but could you please assess this? Because it's scary. Okay. Now just last one. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about the school. This school is as close, almost as close to the new tower as 200 is. It's something like 60 meters away. That's it. These are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind. They may have learning disabilities. Some have ADD, some have ADHD. And some of these students, maybe all, I don't know, are in residence. I went to try and just do a little walk around using my cane, and they shooed me off because residents are there. So this school, I'm hearing impaired. I'm deaf. I wear cochlear implants, so I could hear you on YouTube. But noises, loud noises affect people who are losing their hearing. You lose compression. You lose your hearing range from both ends. People who are blind rely on their hearing for all communication. The impacts of what's done on this school is important. It's a special school. It's not just any local neighborhood school. It's a special school. I don't know why. Maybe the head of it didn't know enough to put in a proposal. I shouldn't be talking about it. He should. But anyway, I'm here. Last slide.
Betty, you're well over time. If you can just wrap up, please.
So assessing the feasibility of the pivot podium. You cannot approve today and assess that option. You've told us if you approve the plan, you are not able to assess that option. The second, okay, already said, assess wind impacts, impacts on trucks, fire trucks, and ability to provide EV charging. You know, you should never be approving a new apartment building that cannot provide EV charging. These people can't run extension cords down to some out place. They have to have charging near where they live. You shouldn't be going ahead with new, I believe. It's too much an important issue of the future.
Betty, I'm sorry, I need to cut you off there. Understood.
I won't hear you.
Sorry, pardon?
So speak very slowly.
Okay, I'm very sorry. You're way over time. I have to cut you off there.
Last slide.
Nope.
Okay.
Sorry, wait 1 sec. Does anyone have any questions for Betty?
Any questions, Joey?
Yep. Thank you very much. No questions. Thank you for your presentation. Which leaves Tim Gray. Tim, good morning. When you're ready, you have 5 minutes to have the presentation to the committee.
Good morning, everybody. I guess I want to start off by saying this isn't a bad development. It isn't. And I know Jeff knows me, and I follow development kind of in the Westboro area fairly closely. And the reality is that this is a good development. I'm sorry for the people sitting behind me, but there's a huge number of factors, and development is complicated. But the one thing that I came, to address is parking units versus the number of units. And you have to always look at that in the context of the site. So for me, I understand, all the traffic issues in Westboro and all this other stuff. But the one thing in this situation is the intersection of Scott and Island Park. And it is a disaster. Since I've really been involved in this, it's the rating of the intersection is an F. It's the worst intersection in all of Westboro. And so to have parking at a 0.8 instead of something that is much, much, much closer to 0.5, it's problematic. And, you know, considering it's so close to the LRT, we should be shooting for that. That should be the baseline. And, you know, from there, they should have to justify why, you know, they're going above that. And I get it. I understand development, and I see Rod sitting back there, and I understand the economics of it. And I looked at it and I said, okay, the reason why there's so much parking is because, you know, they've got this footprint they want to keep, and they've got to go down 2 stories. So that's it. This is what, and I'm sure they crunch the numbers. It's going to cost us X amount of dollars per space, and so on and so forth. I get it. But so then I thought about it, and I thought, if that's the situation, then they got to increase the number of units, and they can. And this is going directly against what the people here are saying, but they've got to do that. And I looked at, okay, is there a way that they could increase the size of the tower? You know, just by increasing that size to add 2 1-unit, you know, single bedroom units in that tower, you know, you're looking at 6 meters, you know, 3 on one side and 3 on the other. You're adding another 40 units with no additional parking. So you're getting that number, you know, closer and closer to 5 or 0.5. And we just, the community cannot absorb the traffic anymore. It's particularly at that corner. So this is just something that, you know, I really am passionate about, because there's lots of developments on our side or on this side of Scott Street that, you know, they're doing that, and developments that have 1,000 units in it. So I'm looking at, you know, long-term, you know, I call it the old CBC building, but it's a Health Canada building, that something's going to happen there, whether it's next year, 5 years, or 10 years, and there's going to be a lot of units there. We have to be able to leave some space in the traffic to accommodate something there. We can't allow 0.8 here and then 5 years down the line say it's, you know, I'm sorry, you guys gotta do a 0.2. You know, that's my only issue with this thing, and I think the staff have got to kind of attack that right on the get-go. I'm over time.
Not right on time. Thank you very much, Tim. Obviously, I've got significant sympathy. We don't have parking maximums, I don't believe, here. But we'll talk to staff about that. Are there any questions for Tim? Wilson? Sorry, Councillor Lowe.
Wilson's my name, but anyway, no, thank you. Thanks for the delegation. I have a question for the delegate, obviously. When you said 0.8, was that including the 125 spaces that are being replaced on the surface right now, or did you factor that out?
Sorry, Councillor, was that for staff or was that for Mr. Gray?
It was for the delegate, because he mentioned.
Oh, well, okay. I think I know the answer, but I think staff knows it too. So the allotment of the 90 spaces, that's the 0.8 doesn't include that. Okay, so that's been, I think that's how. So there's 90 spaces that are going to the existing building. So that leaves you know, 145 parking spaces for 184 units. That's how I've worked it out. And then I also looked at it, you know, as the two buildings. It's the same. If you just take the total number of parking spaces in both buildings, the new one and the existing one, and you know, do that same math, it's still around, you know, in the 0.8 area. So there's no real reduction in you know, the effect that it's going to have on you know, the traffic in Westboro.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, I think that's a question I'll also pose to staff later on. I was frantically scrolling through the thing as you were mentioning the numbers to try to find it, but I found it now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And Tim, I don't see any further questions for you. Thank you very much for the presentation. So if members have questions for staff, now is the time to pose those. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. We heard from a number of delegates about the impact on surrounding communities, and I just wanted to, you know, there was one delegate, Mr. Andrews, who had mentioned that perhaps it was affecting one area of the community more than the other. So I just wanted to see, is it staff's opinion that the applicant has minimized the impact, you know, on views and privacy for the surrounding development?
Yes, it is our position that the present location of that tower is the optimal location to minimize impacts overall.
And then generally, how do applicants demonstrate this? Or is there some sort of formula that you guys use, like putting in distances to buildings or density of buildings, the shade cast by the buildings? Like, is there a formula or something that you use specifically to determine that?
Not a specific formula in regards to the noise or the shadow studies. We kind of examine the how the shadow casts upon the adjacent properties, and sort of make an assessment based on that. I'll say specifically that the way that this building is positioned, the shadow will align with the building to the east and actually minimize. If you stagger those, then they'll act as one large shadow casting upon the adjacent properties. What's more is if you move that building to the north, it will greatly impact that pocket neighborhood north of Clearview. So that was one way that we assess compatibility. The other is just examining the building sort of heights and ensuring that there's proper angular plane. So we assess that there's a proper angular plane from the property to the north, and then also the building form is appropriately adjusted to correspond with the low-rise communities around it. So a maximum 4-story podium will be a good interface with the low-rise residential, both north and south of the building.
Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the delegates who came out. On behalf of the delegates, I just want to ask about drainage. I know it was answered in the report, but is there anything further in terms of just permeable surfaces to absorb water? Frankly, I'm not worried about the floodplain, and I know about floodplains. I live right on the street with one, so I'm quite familiar with them. But this is quite a distance away. But I think it's fair to always ask about the landscaping and permeability. We do that for infill, and I just want to know what we're doing for towers like this.
Right, so that would be something that we would examine in greater detail at the site plan application stage, which presently we don't have. Although the applicant did provide a serviceability report that does touch on the capacity of the local or the surrounding stormwater pipes, and was able to determine that there is sufficient capacity, though the permeability or the runoff coefficient is something that we would look at in more detail once we're at site plan.
Thank you. It's been raised, but I think it's something we should look at every site. This is something that's ongoing, whether it's a single family home, whether it's a tower. So, notwithstanding its location. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, we had some comments suggesting that this was a floodplain or close enough to what could be a floodplain to create a risk. Could staff please comment as to whether or not that is relevant here?
The property is not within the floodplain. I'm just measuring it out now. It's about 260 meters from the nearest flood zone, which is zoned EP, and that's north of the property near the river, beyond the Kichi-Zibi McCann Parkway.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I certainly would, entertain the idea of being thoughtful about when we are in a floodplain. I don't want to speak for Councillor Kavanaugh, but certainly Britannia side has seen, a great deal of change and has had some very serious flooding issues. So I do believe that under certain circumstances we could entertain the argument, but we can't build on a floodplain, but we can't also not build on a not floodplain. Something like that. So the idea is that we can't zone for what could be or what might be or what the potential impacts might be. So in this sense, I'm comfortable with the proposed density. I am sympathetic as well to the comments on parking. So I know that the chair is going to have a series of questions for that. So I'll just leave to him to lead those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Can I just clarify with respect to the floodplain, because I was looking at Geo Ottawa and how close we are. This is not within the 1 in 350 year event threshold, I believe.
I'm not sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so there's an extent of flooding that could be anticipated if we had a 1 in 350 year event, and according to our floodplain mapping, this site is not within that. So I also have some significant comfort around the flood potential. I did want to ask, and maybe this is a good question for Mr. Mark. Mr. Stevens, and forgive me, this is a bit of an academic question, I'm sure, but Mr. Stevens pointed to policy 9 that indicates that we should be trying to maximize distances to impacted residents when we're considering things like tower siting. How does that work with are we duty bound to consider that over and above any other consideration when we are approving or contemplating approving developments, or how does that play with all the other factors that we have to consider?
Mr. Chair, it is a general principle both in the consideration of the provincial policy statement and of the official plan that you consider all applicable policies, and that's very true with the provincial policy statement and the official plan. Absent something in the plan that says you are to give emphasis to a particular policy, you consider them all in making your decision.
So it's not the overriding at the expense of anything else. We clearly have an obligation to approve developments that have done their best to try to minimize impacts on other residents. But obviously this is a very significant distance away from the other towers. And I just want to confirm my understanding on the shadow. I was taking a look at some of the shadow studies that are available online. If the tower were to move further north, it looks like there would actually be more shadow over the course of the day. So really what we're talking about is the privacy impact of having the windows directly across, as opposed to a shadow impact of having the tower directly across.
Yes, that's correct.
Do we have grounds as a committee to pass a motion that would restrict the amount of parking in light of the fact that we don't have the maximums here and have that survive a potential challenge?
Mr. Chair, I would offer that as the committee, you certainly have grounds to introduce a motion and decide on it as you will. From staff's perspective, the minimum parking rate on a site like this is 0.5 spaces per unit, and the maximum is 1.75 per unit when you combine visitor and residential. So when we're seeing a rate around 0.8, staff would obviously have to disagree with such a motion because the proposed parking is in line with our zoning bylaw.
Yeah, I think Mr. Gray has raised an excellent point, and I'm not pleased to see a 0.8 development in this location that is so proximate to the LRT station. And I think in the course of doing the comprehensive zoning bylaw, we have to pay attention to those parking maximums. I believe fully what Mr. Gray was saying, that this is a decision that is being driven by how deep in the ground you have to dig. But it's a lot of parking for an area that does experience a lot of traffic impacts, mostly stemming from how busy the Champlain Bridge gets. Okay. I don't have any further questions. Do any members have any last questions? No. Is this item carried?
Carried.
All right, that's approved. Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Andrew. We'll move on. What are we moving on to? Oh, Hawthorne. That's an interesting one too. So this is the consideration of the zoning bylaw amendment for 12 through 24 Hawthorne Avenue. We have asked for a presentation. Eric, I think we'll make that, and then we'll hear from the applicant.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. My name is Eric Fornan. I'm a planner 2 with Development Review Central and Planning Services. As you mentioned, today's file that I'm presenting to you is for a zoning bylaw amendment application, which covers 12 to 24 Hawthorne Avenue as contiguous lands under common ownership. This zoning bylaw amendment would seek to permit a 6-story mid-rise building subject to site-specific standards and a tight zoning schedule. Next slide, please. So the subject lands are found within the Old Ottawa East community, south of the Queensway, east of Colonel By Drive and the Rideau Canal, north of the low-rise community, and west of Main Street. The subject property fronts onto Hawthorne Avenue, which is a traditional main street where new development has been planned for some time, but has not been fully yet realized. The surrounding area is mixed use with a sprinkle of residential, commercial, and institutional uses, and the area is already well serviced as a 15-minute neighborhood, where cycling and transit connections are nearby. As it pertains to the subject property, the existing non-designated heritage buildings reside on a portion of the subject lands, and there are existing hydro lines in front of the property which are being buried as a part of the full reconstruction project along Hawthorne, which will upgrade existing water and sewer infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the subject property is found with the inner urban transect policy area as per the official plan. It is also designated Main Street corridor and within the evolving neighborhoods overlay. The applicable policies from the official plan generally support mid-rise development up to 9 stories for the site, where lot size is sufficient to accommodate transition and where the proposal responds to the context and applicable urban design and growth management policies of the official plan through mixed-use development, built form transition, the provision of an enhanced public realm, and effective site design. Next slide, please. The subject property is also subject to the Old Ottawa East Secondary Plan. The lands are found within Policy Area 1 and designated Main Street, similar to the official plan underlying designation. The secondary plan caps the maximum building height at 6 stories, despite the underlying Main Street corridor designation, which permits up to 9 stories as mentioned. The secondary plan envisions a revitalized Hawthorne, where the public realm is to be expanded and development is intended to align with the traditional Main Street zoning. Next slide, please. So you see in front of you the proposed development. It's a 6-story building with a strong commercial base at the first story, which will activate the street. It contains approximately 67 residential units, 72 bicycle parking spaces, and 47 vehicle parking spaces. The proposal represents a stepped building envelope, where a low-rise podium at 4 stories is provided along the main street, and step-backs are provided above the 4th story along the west facade, above the 5th story along both the front and rear facades, which, in addition to the required minimum setbacks at grade, provide an appropriate transition to the surrounding low-rise context. The proposal is sensitive to adjacent properties with the proposed soft landscaping, trees, and privacy screens along the sides and at the rear. Next slide, please. So as with all zoning applications, the surrounding community was notified of the proposed amendment, and staff received public feedback on the application, which was considered prior to our recommendation and summarized in our staff report. There were a number of design changes made in response to community concerns, but I'll stick to the main changes made in response to the main public feedback received. One of the primary concerns raised by the community was respect to the original proposal to not provide commercial use on the ground floor. The applicant has since added commercial uses, and the requirement for non-residential use on the ground floor is proposed to be implemented through the recommended zoning. Second, displacement was a key concern raised by the community, which staff understand has been appropriately addressed outside the planning and development review process between the councillor's office, the developer, and the current tenants residing at the subject lands. There were also concerns raised with respect to the front yard setback. The applicant made several changes to address these concerns in the front yard area. The applicant increased the front yard setback from its original request, lowered parking garage in the front yard to support tree infrastructure and increase soil depths, and reduced the number of projections along the front facade to support tree canopy growth in this area. Additionally, special attention was paid to the rear yard and to soften the proposal's potential impacts to the properties to the south, resulting from the reduced setback and parking garage projection above grade. This includes added tree plantings and landscaped areas. Next slide, please. So the proposed zoning bylaw amendment seeks to address some zoning deficiencies associated with the proposal and improve upon or maintain certain zoning provisions at staff's request. The proposal maintains the existing TM, parent zone and subzone, and introduces site-specific zoning exceptions and a zoning schedule that ties the development to maximum heights, minimum setbacks, and stepbacks. The maximum height, as it pertains to the maximum height, the proposal seeks to establish a maximum height of 6 stories that is permitted by policy, including a marginal deviation from the angular plane provision. As it pertains to the front yard setback, the proposal provides a slight decrease for a large portion of the site's frontage and a more significant decrease where road widening has already been taken by the city through a previous development application. City staff are confident that the public realm possibilities won't be limited by the reduced setback, and this setback will provide a building line that will support future development at a similar compatible scale along the south side of Hawthorne Avenue. As it pertains to the rear yard setback, this reflects a pinch point that is being created by the proposed development due to the slightly irregular lot fabric. A significant portion of the building is still set back at the required 7.5 meter rear yard setback or greater. The rear yard is densely landscaped with trees and privacy screens to offset the impacts from a reduced rear yard setback at the east end of the building. There are also a variation to the additional minimum front yard setbacks. So this is a slight decrease from the full requirement of 2 meters and is being provided at the 4th and 5th story rather than just the 4th above the 4th. Building articulation and variation is supported as per the applicable traditional Main Street guidelines. And then finally, there's also the deficiency associated with the parking garage. So this represents a slight projection above the average grade in the rear yard. Whereas currently the zoning only permits a parking structure below grade. So this is commonly seen on development applications like this, and staff are recommending a maximum height of 1.5 meters above average grade for flexibility and out of abundance of caution. The top of the parking structure has been landscaped and will be screened from the rear lot line, as will be confirmed through the site plan control process. Well, yeah, okay. So I mentioned a few of the deviations or deficiencies, but this zoning amendment also includes a number of status quo or improvements, which align with the objectives of a traditional Main Street and is reinforced by our city's guidelines and Main Street corridor policies. So just to summarize why staff is, next slide, please. Just to summarize why staff is recommending the zoning bylaw amendment today. So we have to evaluate consistency with the applicable policies and guidelines and review the appropriateness of the zoning request for the site and in this context. In staff's opinion, we believe the proposal is consistent with provincial policy direction to develop service lands within the existing built-up urban area. We also believe that the mid-rise height is acceptable based on the applicable policies. We also believe that the proposal is consistent with traditional Main Street guidelines to provide a strong low-rise podium and at-grade commercial uses. And then we also support the amendment as it generally maintains the TM zoning, which is the intent of the underlying policy, and provides minor deviations from the current requirements. Therefore, staff support the proposal as it represents good land use planning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Members will have an opportunity to ask questions of staff following the public delegations. The first of which, John Dance. Sorry. Oh, shoot, I'm sorry, the applicants. John, I'm really sorry. We're going to give the applicants a chance to go first. I think that's like the third meeting I've done that at least once. They even give me a script. Good morning, gentlemen. When you're ready, you'll have 5 minutes to address the committee.
This better? Thank you very much. My name is Scott Alain. I'm a senior planner at Photon Consultants. I'm joined here by Kevin Fagan, who is a representative of GBPA Associates, who are the applicant. And I'm also joined by Rod Lahi of RLA Architecture, who is the architect for the building. We're going to be brief in nature. Mr. Forehand was thorough in his presentation. Just to briefly recap, our intent with this rezoning is really to marry the applicable zoning to the secondary plan. We believe the old Ottawa East secondary plan gets a lot right in encouraging a mid-rise form, encouraging step backs and transition, and an active public realm. We believe all these things have been accomplished by the proposed zoning. In terms of next steps, as mentioned by Mr. Forehand, we are proceeding with an active site plan application that will serve to address elements like landscaping and further refinement of the overall design. I note the proposal notes 15 total mid-sized trees being incorporated, 6 trees along the frontage along Hawthorne, and then another 9 trees to the south via a planting bed along the rear lot line. With that being said, I'm going to pass it to Rod, and he'll touch on some of the high-level design elements before we take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Who controls slides? I think we can move through the site plan. This is our site plan in process. That'll be part. Important really is the ground floor in the lower left. You can see the that was brought up in the discussion about the addition through process working with the council's office in the community, the addition of the strong commercial frontage along the street at grade level, and then the both residential on the rear side with the large open terraces to the rear side of the property. The next slide, please. And the next slide. The building is comprised, you can see, of a number of studio, one bedroom plus, 2 bedroom and 2 bedroom plus. So a full range of units to attract this sort of full range of residents. I think I just wanted to touch on some of the key architectural elements. This is say traditional Main Street building and sort of a traditional approach we take to our Main Street developments. And one of them is help to begin to sort of reinforce some ideas through the architectural expression of materials. So we look at first the strong horizontal element on the ground floor, which really highlights the something different taking place on the ground floor. So we did that with a stone veneer basically to highlight the commercial component and sets it apart from the residential above. And then we look at using architectural elements such as the red brick to begin sort of changing and scaling the project against the more metal panel, and then using setbacks to again reinforce that 4-story of the traditional Main Street, stepping back to the 5th, and then stepping back again to the 6th. Again, on the rear, we do the same thing. It's a little different where we step back after the 4th floor. Next slide. Again, you can see the impact. It's, you know, it's a large building, but we always think in context of what's happening over the next 10, 15 years and really begin to set the language and the scale of the projects as Hawthorne continues to develop. Next slide. Just some close again to reinforce that idea that sort of commercial. You can see the large scale windows with direct access to the street, reinforcing that which really doesn't exist on the street. Yes, this is the first time we really begin the idea that the traditional Main Street with ground floor retail can work in the street. Next slide. Same next slide. I think I just wanted to touch on the, oh, sorry, go back, that one. Yeah, a lot of time spent on how do we begin to mitigate the impact, obviously, of a 6-story building, in particular the units at grade. So we began looking at ways to have large planter beds with adequate soil volume to be able to support good sized vegetation. We've been very successful. Actually, we've been most successful with our landscaping on the roofs of most of our buildings, where we actually can control the environment and we're not subject to the salts and everything else that takes place. So we're very comfortable that properly designed planter boxes in this location on top of the garage will work to allow for significant tree growth and green growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from members for the applicants? Councilor Menard?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to the applicant for their presentation and for staff's presentation. Just, appreciate all the changes that we've made together with the community on this one, and your willingness to work with us directly on things like the retail, some of that vegetation, the step backs and setbacks. So thank you for that. One question that I do have, obviously, the main lingering concern is around the underground parking lot. And I think the corresponding soil depth, that's needed to meet the goals under the official plan to provide adequate space for mature and healthy trees. And so I know this is a site plan issue, and I know that the site plan application process is still yet to be underway. And so what I'd like to hear, I guess, from you today given that you've worked closely with us on this, is that there is a willingness to work with our city staff on a potential compromise here that would see some portion of the rear wall of the underground parking lot modified to allow for greater soil depth. That could look like the wall jutting in where the rear yard hedges are to preserve them, or it could look like a slanted roof, as was done at the front yard, but just on the west side where the grade is already at its highest point. So understanding, I know there's some logistical concerns with the ramp and the turning radius. I just want to know from the applicant, is there a willingness to work on this with staff as part of the SPCA process?
Thank you, Councillor. Certainly, even as recent as yesterday, we're beginning discussions on how we can come to a solution that works for this. The applicant is equally motivated to ensure that those trees are viable. And like you noted with the front yard, we had heard that concern about having viable street trees, and that's why we dropped the parking garage in the front yard to accomplish that. So certainly, in a word, that's the basis of the site plan process, and we'll remain in discussion with your office in order to make that happen. Like you said, exactly what it looks like remains to be seen. We'll have to have discussions with structural engineers. We'll work with the architect as well, but certainly that's a priority on our end as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bernard. I don't see any other questions. I'll pose one of my own, which is, it looks like you have agreed to a zoning prohibition against office on the ground floor at grade. I'm just wondering if you can give me some insight. How successful do you think you'll be at attracting a retailer here? I'm curious because we see the variances coming forward where people have been prohibited office on traditional Main Street or quasi-traditional Main Street. They go back for variances because they're not successful at finding a retail, and we know retail is challenging right now. So what is that long-term view in your opinion?
Well, it's tough, as you said. I mean, the traditional Main Streets are hard on Bank Street, which have got a history of traditional Main Street. I mean, keeping them. So, and I personally have always thought the office has always been a key part of traditional Main Streets. When you look at small town Ontario, the real estate office, the lawyer, the accountant, they always had that storefront. I'm always amazed that we have asked to take it out. And I know our client really struggled with this. He started with wanting to do, which was probably the obvious, which would do residential or amenity space in the front in hopes that commercial comes along. I think he's agreed to the commercial and in hopes that he can make it work. It's a small enough amount, I think, that he can make it worse. But the worst thing you're going to have is sitting vacant. So I know my client has got enough friends in the community. He'll push somebody into renting space. So.
No, I appreciate your willingness to give the commercial a try. I think all of us, certainly on council, we prefer commercial to office, but the world is changing. So appreciate you being willing to accept that
we're
prohibition.
seeing it now, even in your ward and in Hindenburg, you've got a couple of real estate companies have gone in and they actually do create spill off work to the commercial because people go to the real estate agent and come from there and get a cup of coffee or lunch or whatever. So it's activity is what you want more than restricted activity, in my opinion.
Yeah, and some of those offices are not subject to the some of the prohibitions on some commercial establishments not to let you see in the building, right?
Right.
The weed shops, for example, are which is better, a cannabis store where you can't see in, or a real estate agent who is, people sitting at desks and eyes on the street. So, sorry, that's pretty tangential to this discussion, but it's interesting that you've accepted that for the time being anyways. I don't have any further questions. I don't see any others from members. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
John, I apologize again. Kelly's not kicking me under the table, so I'm pretty confident it's your turn now. Whenever you're ready, you have 5 minutes to make it a.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm John Dance. I'm the chair of the Old Ottawa East Community Association Planning Committee. It's been a while being here in person. It's great to see people again. I want to do a variety of things here. I want to set the context for this. I want to speak to our key concern, our recommendations, but I also want to raise a couple of other issues to address what staff are speaking of. First off, next slide, please. Compatibility. Well, the community association, the community initiated the TM zoning for Hawthorne through the CDP, then secondary plan processes. We specifically asked for 6 stories on the north side of Hawthorne Avenue and 4 on the southern side, in order the 4 on the southern side was to ensure compatibility with those on the next street, Graham. So when the zoning was approved, it was 6 stories on both sides. We worked very hard with the city, and it got the critical south side became 4 stories in 2015. Here we have the case that the developer is seeking 6 stories. As per the maximum allowed in the OE, the secondary plan, and also given Bill 23 provisions. And we're not opposing the 6 stories. However, the secondary plan specifies that the south side should be step building envelope massing, because it's important to achieve compatibility with a low-rise neighborhood on Graham Avenue to the south. We are saying that the proposed 6-story, as configured at the moment, and with the parking garage going to the lot line as it is, does not achieve such compatibility as required by the secondary plan. Next slide, please. The second context is indeed about trees being removed, trees proposed. Yes, at the rear, flowering plums go a maximum of 6 meters. They're proposed for above ground planters, and we know how well trees grow in very limited soil. We've seen the Lansdowne Aberdeen site and what happened when there was no soil in which to grow trees. But the reason for the planters is because the developer is proposing that the underground parking go right to the lot line, and the impact of that is to remove 2 large canopy trees and to prevent other trees really from growing to any significance. The underground parking proposes 47 spaces, 50% above the zoning bylaw minimum. Yes, I know it's a minimum, and it also projects. You heard the city staff say that this is a strong 15-minute neighborhood and requires some parking spots, but it does not require 16 more than the bylaw requires. There simply is no compelling planning rationale for additional parking. They are just to serve as non-affordable units. No additional units will result from the excess parking. And I stress, we're not opposing the number of units in this development. We're not opposing the height. We're just asking that there be reasonable land so that trees can actually grow. And next slide, please. Okay, so we're recommending some reduction in the number of underground parking lots. And you may recall that my colleague Ron Rose was here 3 months ago on the case of 15 Des Ablés, and development that had 4 times as many dwelling units, and it had 0 residential. And we said there should be some. Yet at the end of that, none were created. So we thought there should be some. We didn't seek the minimum. We just asked for some. And yet this committee and council approved 0. And that's your prerogative. But here we're in a case, also a 15-minute neighborhood, where we're asking for fewer than you can understand how this is very frustrating for community associations, and how developers tend to get just what they ask for. And it's troubling. Let's put it that way. So anyway, we're asking for fewer underground parking spots, or at least pulling back the parking garage from the southern lot line, so that the 2 trees can exist, and we get more trees that will actually grow. And this is important for the much needed real tree canopy in the urban core, and so it gives better buffer for the Graham residents, lessens reliance, and frankly, for your new zoning bylaw, we really shouldn't be having parking garages going to the lot line if we want to have trees. Next slide, please. And look, I should say, I'm encouraged to hear what Councillor Menard said, to say that, you know, there seems to be some flexibility, but boy, it's taken a long time to get to the point for the flexibility to get those trees to be in the back. Be interested to see what comes. Our other two main issues, and I know we're probably out of luck in this because city deems it just minor variance, and or not a minor variance, but a minor deviation. But everywhere else on for the Main Street new developments, we have had that 2-meter front yard setback at ground level. And it's really important because that provides this full space. What's happened in this development is we have a series of columns that stick out 1 meter into the space. It's just not acceptable. This will establish the precedent for the rest of what happens on Hawthorne and the rest of what happens on Main Street. It's a lousy precedent, and you should push back on. It's minor, so why can't the minor be in favor of the community?
On that point, you're well over time at this point.
Oh, sorry.
I apologize. I'll ask Kelly to advance the next slide, and I'm going to guess that there may be questions.
Okay, can I just my final note, we'll skip over the back. My final note is that this well-respected developer has this 18 Pretoria, which is just across Pretoria Bridge. There, they saved this massive tree, and my calculation of the parking garage under there, they were able to put a parking garage in the same limited lot depth that we're talking about here. So I asked them to please do the same here. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, John. I'll see if there are any questions for you, and Councillor Menard has questions for you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, John, for your presentation. Excellent as usual in terms of the detail that you go into with these, and just appreciate all your work on the planning committee for Old Ottawa East. I know you've made a big difference there. And amongst all the other things that you've done for the community over the years, including being the #1 advocate for the Flora footbridge in this area and really pushing that project through. So thanks for everything you do to make that a 15-minute community, which we obviously laud in this application. There is some strong language in our official plan meant to ensure that there is sufficient soil depth for large mature trees to flourish. I want to make sure to question around whether or not you think we're living up to that on this site yet. I've heard from staff that there are difficulties in zoning beneath the ground, and that's not something that we're able to regulate, but obviously it's a compatibility thing with the developer and our staff in site plan. And so I guess I just wonder, what would you recommend staff do as part of that ongoing site plan application to help to remedy the situation that you've mentioned around the parking, and recognizing the other changes that have been made on the application?
Through the chair, Councillor Menard, I understand that there were some improvements at the front. You know, 3 cities trees are being cut, but new trees will be put in, and the parking garage will be sloped, so there's a little more soil for trees at the Hawthorne side. At a minimum, that should be done at the rear. They can do it there. They surely can do it here at the rear to help have real trees for the Graham. So I really don't understand. And also, given what you see at 28 Pretoria, I do not understand why this developer doesn't pull that parking garage back. It frankly is a unwillingness of the developer rather than a feasibility. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, John. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Menard. So we have a similar situation with this proposal that has more than the minimum parking in an area where, personally, I feel, it's supported by good transit. It's supported by great walking, great cycling infrastructure, great amenities in the neighborhood. Does your community association have a position on maximum parking levels?
No, we given how the things have evolved, we would say you should be towards the minimum, but certainly not over the minimum. That's our position. We realize that's not what the bylaw says. Yeah. But frankly, in our community, you need a car occasionally, but you do need everybody doesn't need a car. So we really need to be moving. And I believe, as a number of people around this table said, in the consideration of 15 days outlay, we need to move away from having cars, especially in the core. Thank you, Councillor.
No, it's a fascinating discussion. I know Tim in the back there with the Westboro Community Association would probably be interested in having that discussion, and I know that staff are listening. John, thank you for your presentation today. Alors, la prochaine, c'est Francine Leduc. Bonjour Francine, quand vous êtes prêt, nous avons, vous avez 5 minutes pour faire une présentation.
I will do it in English. Good morning, all. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Directly, the development and discussion, I'm here to request that the municipality live by its official plan policies requiring the protection of existing trees and soil volumes, which Ms. Ross, a lawyer working for some of the tenants, was supposed to be doing a presentation earlier. I don't know what happened. In doing so, I first ask that all NIMBY watchdogs stand down. I'm not here to request the development be disallowed. Housing and densification are required, and better they be in the core than in the green belt or on farmland for all the obvious reasons. I'm also here to request that JB Development reconsider the configuration of the parking garage to accommodate for protection of existing trees, not just on their property, but also on our property and our neighbors' properties. There were some photos of the beautiful large mature oak tree and maple tree, which benefit much of the Graham Avenue residents and will benefit the Hawthorne residents. Graham Avenue, 200 meters east-west street, 1 church, 2 schools, parking lots, total maybe 17 houses. Some are single-family dwellings, but a number of them house multiple apartments. All to say it's not a McMansion neighborhood, it's a mixed neighborhood, a neighborhood with relatively small footprints. In the 7 years that my spouse and I have lived on Graham, we've witnessed 4 mature blue spruce, 1 older maple, and a spectacular 100-plus-year-old healthy silver maple right next door be removed with permission from the city. All but one of those due either to building a single-family home or due to the whims of an absent owner who felt the 100-year-old tree was a disadvantage. Also in the past 7 years, collectively, all of us, we have witnessed in Ottawa alone 2 major floods, a tornado, a derecho, didn't even used to know that there was a thing called a derecho, poor air quality levels due to forest fire smoke last June, and last but not least, the Rideau Canal didn't even open last year because of a warm winter. Unprecedented, apparently, since the opening of the canal. I may have missed something, but nonetheless, all have been extremely costly. These events are relevant to my ask. It's my understanding that Ottawa aims for a 42% tree canopy. Does that mean Mr. Bassey could, in this case, could say, never mind the trees in the urban core and the value they have for locals in the environment, I'll compensate by planting multiple more trees somewhere in the rural areas. Sorry, cooling heat islands doesn't work that way. Science is clear that sufficient trees in a neighborhood can reduce summer heat by up to 8 to 12 degrees Celsius via shading and transpiration. This could be a great advantage to the tenants of 18 Hawthorne, if that's what we're calling it, as they will otherwise get full-on morning sun. Lovely, but hot and costly for air conditioning. Trees can also provide a natural form of insulation to reduce noise pollution in the neighborhood, which really one should consider in this case, given that this rental building overlooks the 417 on the north side. I can guarantee there is noise. All to say, how can we solve this problem together? All of us. In common, we want more housing and densification. Mr. Bassey, I know you're not here, but I'm asking somebody to share the message. You're invested in a project on a transportation corridor which allows your tenants to have full access to active transportation, public transportation, and an easy 15-minute walkable hood. It's a great spot. So why then, other than purely a business decision, and I am a business owner, so I understand those, could you justify asking for 50% more parking than is required with the result of likely destroying otherwise beneficial trees on your property And as importantly, on ours, what right do you have to impact our trees? As most mothers do, I have ears and eyes in the back of my head right now. So I can see the eye rolls and hear the guffaws at the very thought of protecting how little there is of the environment in our urban core. I stand here before you asking you to make a better choice. I implore you to do better, to do the right thing. I invite you to innovate. Find a solution that works for all. There are some smart people in this room. Finally, when? To city councilors, to lawyers, the councilors of urban and rural areas, to planners, engineers, architects, developers, I ask you, when will you begin to make decisions through the lens of the environment? Is it time yet to consider humanity and the planet before all else? If not today, will 2025 be the right time? Will 2030? Will 2045? When our kids and grandkids, young people ask, when did we choose to make a critical difference to the environment? What will we say? Economists in large part seem to think making sustainable decisions makes for good business practices. Antonio Guterres himself, Secretary General of the United Nations, seems to think now is the time to act. It's time now for all of us to act.
Christine, thank you very much.
Dorian?
I see that Councillor Menard has questions for you. I'll ask Glenn Gower just to take over the meeting for a moment, knowing that Christy Ross is up after as the next delegate.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Francine, for your presentation. Appreciate your comments. I want to zero in on what you're asking for here. I suppose one of the options here would be for the development to keep to the minimum amount of parking that's required currently in our zoning bylaw. Is that some of what you're asking for, obviously with a much larger context, to help to achieve that greater soil depth and tree canopy growth?
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking me if the pullback or the setback of the underground parking lot would be sufficient to save the trees, the two mature trees on their property and the cedar trees on all of our properties? Is that the question?
Not exactly. I've heard that those two trees at the back, that would be exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, to save with the current build. What I'm asking is, are you looking for the developer to stick to the parking minimums that are identified for this instead of going over those, so that there might be some more wiggle room instead of two levels of underground parking, space taken up?
So yes, we are asking for them to have less parking for all the reasons mentioned in my presentation. But we're also asking that it be pulled away from the lot line, because inevitably it will impact our yards, and that doesn't seem appropriate, and nor do we want it.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments here today. Thank you. Over to you, Vice Chair Gower.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I'm seeing no other hands up, so thank you, Francine, for your presentation today. And we will go now to our next speaker, Christy Ross. Good morning, Christy.
Good morning, Mr. Gower, and good morning, committee members. My name, you can hear me, correct? All right, perfect. There's my, I have a slide presentation for you. My name is Christy Ross, and I'm a planning and environmental lawyer. I submitted written comments and I'm making these comments today on behalf of Barbara and Ian Kirk, who reside at 11 Graham Avenue, which is directly abutting the subject site. The rear yards are adjacent. So I come to committee today on a very narrow issue. I'm not talking about refusal of application or reducing any form of intensification at all, but I'm really here just to discuss the need to set back the wall of the underground parking garage to enable soil and existing canopy trees to be retained on site as per official plan policies. Eliminating the 16 extra parking spots that are requested above zoning should be reconsidered in my submission. And I'm hopeful that this committee can give some clear directions on adding conditions at the site plan approval process. So both Francine and John have already spoken to you a little bit about this, so I don't want to tread over old ground, but I do really want to focus on the official plan policies that are applicable in this case. So next slide, please. So as you can see, and as we have discussed, this is a wonderfully located central subject property. It's within a 15-minute neighborhood, close to transit, on a transit priority, close to bike infrastructure. Next slide. So in terms of the application details, we've been provided with quite a lot of information on that already. Essentially, the application is seeking an increase in the minimum, parking requirements under the zoning bylaw with an additional 16 spaces. There's also relief to have the underground parking lot protrude. And really, it's those sort of two factors, as I understand those two design decisions that are resulting in the need to extend the underground garage to the full extent of the property, right back to the property line. So all soil and all trees will be removed from the site. And that's pretty significant and contrary to some policies in the Ottawa official plan. We heard from Mr. Leahy about the sort of planter boxing that is going to be located on top of the underground parking garage sort of protrusion. And wild trees are proposed for that space. Those are small to medium-sized trees, not sort of something that would grow to be a canopy tree, as we understand that term. And based on my review of the landscape plan, about 20 centimeters of soil is proposed in those plant boxes. Next slide, please. So just, I just want to sort of outline the consequences. I've sort of, in the two sort of green circles labeled 7 and 8, those are the existing canopy trees on site. And there's a picture of them as well. So a consequence of the full extent of the parking garage is the loss of those trees. Next slide, please. And now this slide shows potential offsite losses in adjacent Graham Avenue backyards. So the first two photos show a hedge, which is sort of comprised of about 19 small trees with, quite significant diameter, in fact. And then the third tree is the backyard of 13 Graham Avenue. So these are all located very proximate to the property line, and there's like a fear that some of their critical root zone will be impacted by the sheer location of that underground parking wall. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to focus on this very busy slide. It's all in my letter to you, so you can look, but these are the official plan requirements. So the official plan contains very strong policies requiring the integration of trees and adequate soil into the development process. I've given you sort of some of the key ones. In my letter, I go through sort of all of them. And just if we can compare this to our previous official plan, I mean, this is light years ahead in terms of protecting trees and addressing urban heat island effects and climate change. There's also a lot of shall language, and as you all know, shall is something with some legal significance and interpretation, and that requires positive action from council when making planning decisions. So first off, growth, development, and intensification shall maintain the urban forest canopy and its ecosystem services and provide space for mature, healthy trees and adequate volumes of high-quality soil. Planning and development decisions shall have regard for long-term, short-term, and cumulative impacts on the urban forest at both the neighborhood and urban-wide scale. Next, when considering impacts on individual trees, planning and development decisions shall give priority to the retention and protection of large, healthy trees over replacement plantings and compensation. So we have sort of a hierarchy that's created, and this is all in sort of the section I've given you, which is 4.8.2. And it's the focus is on protection, and then if protection can't occur, then ensuring that there's adequate soil volumes so that there can be compensation. And by that, that's a replacement tree that isn't going to be a small ornamental tree. It's going to be a large canopy tree that has some actual, carbon sequestering abilities for the community, and also some shade providing abilities for the committee. So then I've highlighted sub-policy 6, which states that council may refuse a planning application if it fails to provide space and adequate volume of soil for existing and or new trees. So that's point number 1. Second, and this is sort of something I really want to highlight for you, approvals granted by council may include conditions to support tree protection, removal, and replanting. So it's really this clause that I'm actually asking you to consider and to pass on some sort of strong direction, hopefully, at the site plan approval process. Councillor Menard, we've heard, has asked if there's a willingness for the applicant to consider these things, and I would ask that this committee provide some direction with respect to that. And then finally, the city may refuse a development application.
Ms. Ross, you're well over time at this point.
The loss of trees avoidable. Sorry.
Yeah, you're well over time at this point. Have you got one last sentence?
So I basically I'm done. These are sort of the key policies I want to bring to this committee's attention. And I'm just really asking that it's really important when making intensification decisions that this framework, which is very prescriptive and directive, be taken into account, and that the city stop sort of, you know, putting forward applications that extend to the full extent. I'm really asking that there be about a 3.5 meter space of soil at the back of the property, and that the wall of the underground parking garage be pulled back. So thank you very much. Those are my comments.
Thank you very much. There are a couple of questions for you, Councillor Troster.
Hi, Christy. It's nice to meet you. Do
Likewise.
you feel that if this committee were to restrict the parking on the site to the minimum requirement, that would help solve the problem we're trying to solve here in terms of the sustainability of those trees?
So I really think it would actually. I mean, there might be some other design issues with respect to the location of the ramp. I mean, as I think the planner mentioned, there was a switch from which side the ramp is on. Right now, the ramp is sort of running into sort of those canopy trees and the hedge area. So, I mean, that is a factor as well. But the 16 extra spaces, I mean, that's a lot of space in a parking garage. And just looking at some sort of other applications, this developer has done a really excellent, I think, development on Pretoria Avenue that does permit that sort of rear space at the back of the site, and also preserved a very beautiful canopy tree at the front of the site. That whole proposal had 18 parking spaces. So, and a very similar depth in terms of the site itself. So I believe there are engineering solutions if we think creatively and operationalize these like official plan policies that would enable underground parking to be there. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it can be maximized as long as there is this sort of space to protect trees. And having planter boxes as our solution for trees and sort of, I guess, softening impacts on adjacent neighborhoods. I just, from a carbon perspective, they don't have that ability to sequester as much carbon, to grow as large, to shade, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that there's a linkage in both the number of parking spots and then maybe some creative design solutions as well.
Thank you. I just want to say I take the loss of trees in the urban core really seriously. I'm not sure what the numbers are for the glebe, but in Centertown, we're at 20% tree coverage when they say we need approximately 40% to mitigate climate change. So every loss of a mature tree really is a big deal downtown. So I came into this meeting prepared to dissent because of the excess parking and the lack of respect for those trees. But I'm wondering if as a committee we can come up with some sort of a solution, or if this can be dealt somehow at site plan. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Troster. Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Christy, for your presentation. Again, you've identified some very strong language in the official plan meant to ensure that there is sufficient soil depth for large mature trees to flourish. My understanding is that we cannot establish setbacks below grade as part of the zoning. Maybe you have a difference of opinion, and I'd love to hear that if you do. And that we could only increase the setback on the portion of the parking garage that protrudes above grade, given the unequal grading of the site. And so I guess what you'd be getting at is around maintaining the parking minimums here, similar to Councillor Troster's question, maintaining the parking minimums here to hopefully work through this in a future stage of site planning. Please do correct me if I'm wrong, or get to the exact crux of what you're looking for, given the zoning issues identified there, and what OP language you found.
Certainly, absolutely. So I think in terms of the OP language I found, and then I'll sort of circle back to the rest of your question, there's this language specifically, approvals granted by council may include conditions to support tree protection, removal, and replanting. I agree that there are, when we assess setbacks through the current zoning bylaw, we're looking at above grade setbacks. And I think your question is a really interesting one because we have this fantastic and really strong official plan language, and then this question of how do we operationalize it. And I think the implication of this is we can't not operationalize it. So we have to, I think, be creative about that. So there are conditions that can go to the site plan process, but I think there are some legal sort of concerns with that in terms of making those binding and sticking. I think in terms of what this committee could do, I mean, there is a protrusion of the parking garage at 1.5 meters, and one is allowed to have setbacks between something that's above ground and a property line. So one solution could include having a setback from that point. Where the protrusion is on the site is very proximate to these trees and also to the hedges. So that could work. I think there's possibly some concerns though of like, well, could that be circumvented by rating, for instance? So you wouldn't want to, you wouldn't want to sort of lose sort of that ability to implement these official plan policies in that matter if this is something that could be subject to a site regrading. So it's kind of like we have this really strong official plan tool and a question of how do we operationalize it. How this often gets dealt with is, you know, through negotiations between the parties. Certainly there's an instance on Chamberlain Avenue where there was an appeal to the OLT and it was settled sort of on this issue of, you know, moving the underground parking garage, you know, away from, you know, the site of rear lots. And that was mainly done to protect sort of trees that were on sort of the adjacent properties, but impacted by that change. However, like having to go to an OLT hearing, like that doesn't seem very efficient or necessary. So it's really great if we can deal with these things now. So I think I'm asking for council to do something that is, you know, able to be binding at this point so that there's an assurance that this is going to be dealt with. I'm happy to be, you know, there for any discussions at the site plan process, although that's something that's usually, you know, done by councillors and by staff. So I'm in your hands, but I'd like to have, you know, some, you know, firm direction from council with respect to the site plan process and maybe an amendment as well to the rezoning vis-a-vis that 1.5 meter, understanding that you can't unravel that through site grading.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Menard. Councillor Curry?
Yeah, just a quick question, you know, and what I'm hearing you're asking for, you know, I think is a good thing, but this is the kind of thing when I've had discussions with developers and site plan on zoning amendments and major changes for files in Canada, it's done years in advance of committee because any kind of decision where you'd have to change something significant, the developer would have to go back and 2 or 3 renditions. I mean, I can think about one in Canada right now that the developer is working with us and is on its 3rd rendition. Yes, it takes time, but in the end, it'll be the right thing. It's never the thing you're deciding at committee. Like this is committee way down the road. So my question to you is, did you not participate a couple of years ago? And I don't mean to sound snarky. I'm just asking factually. Did you not participate years ago when this file?
Sorry, I think, did you cut out there? I can certainly speak to that. So I was first sort of, the community association spoke to me this summer, and I did have a conversation with Mr. Bassey, sort of asking this exact question this summer, and was unaware that it actually, I was not sent the sort of the 4th change that is now before committee. So the request was made. It was certainly discussions were had with the councillor's office. It was made at that point, but I was not sort of retained in the process earlier than that. I think the community had been engaging in conversations on their own.
Okay.
And that's a really good question, because I agree, like the faster and earlier people get involved, the better, but that's just not always practical from a, from a community engagement perspective and from a, other perspectives like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ross, I don't see any other questions for you. Thank you very much for the presentation. We're going to move into the questions for staff at this point. Councillor Johnson, did you have a motion you wanted to make?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So given the conversation, and on behalf of Councillor Menard, we're going to put forward a motion that requests to limit the parking to the parking minimum on site. Kelly, if you could put it up on the screen, that would be great. So whereas the proposed development at 1224 Hawthorne Avenue is intended to provide significantly more residential parking spaces than are required by zoning bylaw 2008-2050, and whereas the proposed parking garage will require a zoning amendment to include an above grade portion, and whereas there is insufficient distance between the parking garage wall and rear property line to allow the replacement of deep soil to either retain existing mature trees and landscaping, or the replacement with trees that can grow into canopy trees when mature that have the potential to reduce the heat island effect in the urban area. And whereas the official plan in section 4.8.2 prescribes that space be provided for mature healthy trees on private and public property, including the provision of adequate volumes of high quality soil, and that council may refuse applications that result in avoidable tree loss. And whereas the proposed development of 1224 Hawthorne Avenue is within a centrally located transit and active transportation supportive geography in which private vehicle ownership is not a requirement for daily living. And whereas the committee generally considers that the proposed density is appropriate to the site and wishes to preserve the number of housing units, but that the loss of deep soil to accommodate parking spots is inappropriate during a housing emergency. Whereas limiting parking at this site may allow for greater soil depth conducive to large, mature, healthy trees in line with the policies of the official plan. Therefore, be it resolved that the Planning and Housing Committee recommend to Council that parking provided at 1224 Hawthorne Avenue be limited to the minimum requirement under the existing zoning bylaw, and for this limitation to be fixed in the zoning bylaw. So thank you, Chair. So quickly, just to put forward the preamble for the motion. I think we've had a very interesting conversation today about this proposed development, and certainly the tension between housing and trees is not present. We are talking about the threat to mature trees for parking spaces that go above and beyond the minimum. So this, although I can appreciate that certainly we would want to see these types of negotiations deliberated on and concluded on previous to committee, it is also, as elected officials who had put in the official plan, it is our responsibility for that sober second thought to be able to suggest that in fact the conclusion reached was not in line with the official plan as it is intended. And I think we have the ability to get both of our both housing and mature trees and in the urban core preserved on this site. So I've put forward the motion for consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with the committee, is to give members an opportunity to ask questions of staff, including the fact that this motion is on the table. Then I'd like to bring or provide an opportunity of reply to Scott and to Rod and to Kevin before we proceed to a vote on the amendment and the final recommendation. I do feel it's important to provide that opportunity to reply because this could potentially go to the OLT, and I just want to make sure that we demonstrated some procedural fairness here on something that the applicant may well not have been prepared to address. So what I would do is ask members to ask questions of staff for the time being, and then we'll bring the applicant back. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, Chair. Can staff speak to why you're recommending more than the minimum for parking in a location that's so close to transit and to a future LRT station?
Sir Chair, I think that question is more adequately addressed at the applicant. We're not making a recommendation, we're reacting to a proposal. So the applicant has proposed a design that has the number of parking spaces through the 2 levels of parking. It does comply with our zoning in terms of the amount of parking relative to resident and visitor. So our job is to assess the application and review its appropriateness, and that is not something they're seeking relief on, is the parking rate.
I will reform Councillor Trosser's question in a bit. Councillor Gower, sorry, Vice Chair Gower.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was rereading a bit from one of the discussion papers related to the new zoning bylaw amendment that's coming up. And the one on trees specifically mentions that as a general rule, trees should not be removed to support parking for development, especially where in support of parking spaces that are not required to be provided under the zoning bylaw. Now, I know that's not policy yet. It may be in a couple years, but it would seem like we're heading that direction with our zoning. But besides any of the direction that's in the official plan that's mentioned in that motion, is there any other existing policy that speaks to kind of this prioritization of tree preservation? Like, is there any other policy that speaks to when it's appropriate to support tree removal versus when it's not, as it relates to parking specifically?
Thank you for the question. So staff have reviewed the policies that were mentioned earlier by one of the delegates, which emphasizes the importance of urban forest or tree canopy within our downtown core, and staff of course encourage the maintenance and longevity of that tree canopy to support a number of other objectives. We will note that as per the policy, which was actually excluded from the policy language that was up on the screen earlier, does dictate adequate volumes of high quality soil as recommended by a landscape architect. In the case of this application, and in the case of many applications that we receive for zoning and site plan control, we receive a site plan, a tree conservation report, a landscape plan that are typically stamped or prepared by qualified individuals who are experts in forestry and experts in landscape architecture. Those individuals submit and prepare their studies to the city for our review. During the review process, our internal experts in forestry and in environmental planning, who are responsible for reviewing the TCR and the landscape plan, confirmed the assumptions made by the qualified individuals on the applicant's team and determined there would be sufficient soil volumes for these trees. I will mention that these are details that will be confirmed through the site plan approval process, as the location of the parking structure, the exact location of the parking structure. So for the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment application, our staff concurred with the assumptions made by the applicant team and had no concerns or objections on this zoning bylaw application.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'm not sure about this one, so listen to the rest of the conversation.
Thanks, Vice Chair. Councillor Bernard.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to my colleagues for a good discussion. There is a lot of other positives I've mentioned, obviously, in my comments about this application, but I think we're seized with this one issue, and so I don't want to lose all the other changes that have been made, the positives here that have happened in good negotiation with the community, with the developer, our office, and others. So a lot of thanks to go around, first of all, Chair, for getting to this point. I think on this particular issue and the motion that's been brought forward, I do want to talk to staff about it a little bit. As I mentioned during the comment period or question period, it's my understanding we can't establish setbacks below grade as part of zoning, and that we can only increase the setback on the portion of the parking garage that protrudes above grade, given the unequal grading of the site. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and so the motion doesn't speak to that, but instead I think speaks to the parking minimums. Is council within its authority to to ask, I guess, enshrine that this development does stick to the parking minimums in this case, as the motion decrees.
Here, I'm going to respond. This conversation came up with the last item. It's definitely within your purview to consider a motion of that nature.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess the big crux of it, the big question is, if that were to occur and that parking minimum was stuck to, is there a chance that soil depth could be increased, that there is a potential for maintaining the trees on site at the back, or having new mature tree growth at the back? I guess, are you reading the motion that that's the intent here? Or is it that we might end up with a situation where we have fewer parking spots in there, but not the tree growth potential or maintenance that we would expect from the discussion that's arisen today?
Chair, I'm hesitant to make an assumption, so I'll explain my response as follows. I think whether the parking rate remains as currently proposed or whether the parking is reduced as per the motion on the table, in both scenarios, staff take the consideration of tree canopy seriously, and it will be reviewed accordingly at site plan. What we currently have is a design with large planter boxes. Those may not be the final design, but we've been working closely with the applicant to make sure that the 9 trees proposed at the back can survive and can have adequate soil volume. It's been prepared by a landscape architect who's currently showing that those 9 trees can reach a mature height of 6 meters, which we think is an appropriate medium-sized tree for an urban corridor site. So I can't make any speculation as to whether the design of the garage would be significantly altered with the parking reduction. One would assume that it might, but I don't know that it would make a significant improvement to the availability of soil in the rear yard. We just haven't had the ability to take that review.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think the intent of the motion obviously would be to maintain as much soil depth as possible and to pull it back and possibly save those trees in the back, though I understand that's difficult, but that's, I think, the intent that we've been hearing around the committee table. So look, Chair, that's it for my questions, and just a final thank you to staff, the developer, our community who've raised these issues. I think we're going to get to a good application here at the end. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Menard. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you guys for answering all those questions. I ran one of the things on my platform during the campaign was keeping mature trees standing, as many as we can, in new developments. And so this is a really interesting conversation for me as a councillor, because I often come to this committee and argue for more than the minimum number of parking spots. Because I do represent a rural community where most people drive, and just am sympathetic to the issues that I think are described sometimes in new developments when we have narrower streets and less parking available. But when I do look at this, I see a site that could perhaps support, minimum. I would never support below the minimum parking, but this motion does seem to maintain that, while also making the argument that it would help keep more mature trees standing, which I think we all agree is important, particularly this day and age. But am I hearing from you guys that it's possible to provide the proposed number of spots while also maintaining enough soil that would support mature trees?
So I would just kind of preface what I'm about to say is that we're still subject to a site plan control application, and typically landscape plan is very conceptual at zoning, and the details would get refined at the site plan control process. So I will say that based on what we have reviewed internally and received from the applicant in terms of their landscape plan and TCR, which again are prepared by qualified professionals in the province of Ontario, which do show sufficient soil volumes for the trees, has been confirmed internally, and we have no concerns or objections on the landscape plan for zoning purposes.
So I guess my follow-up question to that would be, if there is sufficient soil to support trees that can grow up to 6 meters, why is it being designed with planter boxes and not right into the ground?
Right. So thank you for the question. I say the simple kind of answer to that question is that the parking structure obviously contains the number of parking spaces that it does. And what we typically see in these proposals is an underground or below grade parking structure that goes right up to the extensive property lines. It's very common across the city. In this case, there's a slight protrusion above the average grade. And we have recommended similar proposals in various, amendments in various wards across the city previously. We consider that the impact of the projection above the average grade is marginal, especially with the provided screening at the rear property line, which would mitigate the view of this raised area, and also provide, in our opinion, as proposed by the applicant, a compatible design at the rear.
And we often hear about conversations that could or should happen at the site plan stage, but what are the challenges? Is it more challenging to influence a difference in the design at the site plan stage if you find that the soil doesn't support it, or whatever is found during that conversation? Like, what are the challenges if we don't pass this motion and then decide at site plan that we would like to reduce parking to preserve trees?
I would say right now that we have a concurrent applications for zoning bylaw amendment and site plan control applications. It seems today, based on the conversation we've had, that the applicant team would consider looking at this area, and staff are willing to work with the applicant to find solutions, as we have on in other areas on the site, such as the front yard, where the parking structure was lowered in that area and other measures were made to increase soil depth. But as we understand it right now, that this area does have sufficient width depth for the trees that are proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. What I'm proposing to do, I think Mr. Mark is seeking to interject. Councillor Johnson still wishes to speak, and I still want to bring the applicants here for questions. So what I'm proposing is Mr. Mark seems keen on having a statement. So Mr. Mark, please go ahead. Always valuable.
Mr. Chair, of course, I only have the right to speak at committee if I'm asked a question. I thank you for inviting me to speak. I just wish to make two points. First, I'm not speaking loud enough. I apologize. I wish to make 2 points. First, I feel the need to remind committee of the changes that were made to the Planning Act last year, such that the authority over site plan is now an appointed role of staff as opposed to a delegated role of staff. And therefore, while committee can ask staff, committee or council, can ask staff to consider matters, committee and in the same way as with the chief building official, committee and council are not in the position to direct staff any longer with respect to site plan matters. And particularly commenting on the parking issue, if a parking provision, a cap or no cap is set in the zoning bylaw, then the developer has the right to build to that. So even if committee did have the authority over site plan, if the developer was building in accordance with whatever limit there was in the zoning bylaw, the developer would be able to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Tim, just to clarify the intent of that second one. So what the motion would do is put a cap on parking in the zoning bylaw. What if the developer is able to contain that number of parking units, they can configure that physically on the lot however they wish underground, right?
In accordance with the setbacks. So that, which also raises another matter. I heard from Councillor Menard a concern that the setback provisions do not apply below grade. In my opinion, they do.
Yeah, and that's I share that, sorry, I'm obviously defer to your significant legal understanding, but my understanding is that if we wanted to establish a setback for the rear wall of the garage, that's within our purview to do.
I hold the same opinion, Mr. Chair.
And that would be the best way to ensure that the physical configuration is such that there would be, say, a minimum of 3.5 meters to the property line.
I'm not in a position to say it's the best way. It is certainly a way, Mr. Chair.
No, understood. So what I'd like to do, I see Councillor Johnson's hand is back down. So what I would like to do is bring the applicants back to address the motion that is on the table. And I'm actually contemplating a short 10-minute recess after that, before we resume discussion with staff or any possible modifications to that motion. So I'm just going to give you an open floor for a few minutes.
So, Scott deal with the questions of additional parking, but I will say that any additional parking, which is in the range, I think 11 additional cars, would have zero impact on the placement of the rear rear parking garage. I'd hate to say it's pure mathematics, but it is. In Ottawa, we traditionally have 100-foot depths. We have restrictions that says for the first 20 feet from the property line, the slope of the garage is only maximum about 2%. Then we have restrictions on the steepness of the ramp going down. So what happens in 100-foot depths, we still haven't got enough depth to get to the first P1 level. So that's why we're asking for that additional zoning height, because the rear is actually sticking out a little bit higher, and that allows us to get down. But if we were to, as you mentioned, to pull back that garage 3.5 meters, my only choice at that point would be to lose all the ground floor units and turn the ramp internal and basically wipe out the whole ground floor. And essentially I would have questionable retail on the street and 0 units in the back, because it'd be the only space to allow me to get to the P1 level. In the case of the Pretoria project, same client and same architect, he made a choice on that project to not do any basically underground parking. We only have 7 parking spaces in that building for I think 40 something units. And he's living the nightmare of that. He thought, no, it's not going to be a problem. It's downtown. So he's basically having to buy street parking. And so he's got, as you imagine, the Glebe street parking is an issue. And so that's why it caused all sorts of overflow parking issues. And so on this one, he's elected to go with proper underground parking. He didn't want to make that mistake again. And he's put in place, I think, some 11 additional parking spaces over the minimum. But that 11 is really just because by the time we do that P2, we've got extra space and we were able to fit the 11 parking spaces in, and I imagine they'll be well used. But I think, as everyone mentioned, this is a great site. I think he may have overparked it actually, but he's not willing to take that risk at this point. But those 11 spaces have no impact on where that rear line of the parking garage is. It would be there even if we were doing 25% parking, we would be there. And it's pure math. I mean, we've done many traditional Main Street projects. They're all 100-foot depth and they all have this issue. Even in the downtown area on Bezer Street, we have the same issue with underground parking. It's always the same. It's a factor of Ottawa having a very small 100-foot depth compared to cities like Toronto or Vancouver, which have these great deep lots.
So, thanks, Mr. Chair. I also want to make a couple points. Appreciate the opportunity to respond. We certainly share the concerns of the members of the motion about the viability of the trees in the rear yard. And to Mr. Forehand's point and others, this is why we are concerned about ensuring that through the site plan process, this is resolved. So that's clear 100%. And there's been some discussion, firstly, about Pretoria, which we were also the agent for and was the applicant's previous site, kind of the sister building to this. And a lot of discussion has been had about their willingness to collaborate and implement changes and respond to feedback from the community. That's been shared here as well, where you see the addition of commercial uses, the improvements along the public realm, the removal of projecting balconies from the front yard, and the achievement of one-to-one bicycle parking. So just to give a little bit of a picture of what we're proposing numerically relative to what the minimum is. So the bylaw currently reads, and I'm summarizing high level, but 0.5 per unit less the first 12 units. That requirement becomes 28 resident parking spaces. What we are proposing is 39 resident parking spaces. So when you subtract, and that's using the same formula, basically what it comes down to is we're proposing a ratio of 0.71. So from 0.5 to 0.71, in my view, and why we've moved forward with this is that it's a reasonable ask. And particularly one of the reasons I want to raise for this is there are 31 two-bedroom units in this building. Two-bedroom units are characteristically more desirable for families. And in order to maintain, the diversity of tenants, you need to have vehicles. I own a vehicle. I live downtown. I don't use it every day. I use it on the weekends. And people have a necessity for this for things like elder care, pet care, hobbies, etc., that might justify a vehicle use. The folks who move into a building like this are more inclined to select this neighborhood because they value things like cycling and will have the opportunity to do so with the one-to-one spaces. So that's one thing I want to add. And then also the scale of the parking garage, as we had noted, is not necessarily tied to this motion. And I want to be clear that the utility of the parking garage, of course, titled a parking garage, also has a lot of the mechanical uses. So the hydro vault, et cetera, things that would otherwise go into the penthouse, which we reduced in scale, subject to feedback from the community. Also our bike storage, which again, where we have the luxury of space to actually achieve this one-to-one ratio through the scale of the bicycle parking. And that all aligns with what Mr. Lahey has said about the ramps and those things of those natures. So lastly, I want to raise just quickly the relationship of grade. So the situation we encounter is, a building inherently has to be level, and we're on a surface that slopes downward. And so this is where we encounter this issue where in order to include trees, we have to get creative. And what we have is, I believe, a creative solution, one that subject to the scrutiny of the licensed professionals that will continue to work on this can be resolved. And so in my view, I think this application can proceed without the amendment.
Thanks. We'll call your time there. The opportunity is now for members of committee to pose questions to the applicant because they won't be coming back to the table. Councillor Kelly?
If we did pass this motion, would you appeal it?
All right, maybe I'll let the applicant speak to that.
Following an internal discussion, I would assume so, but we would have to confirm.
Yeah, I would add that given the nature of the motion, we would be comfortable moving forward as, expert planning witnesses for it, because again, I think there's a strong rationale echoed by both ourselves and staff. Thank you.
Councillor Menard? Oh, sorry, Councillor Kelly, you've through. Yeah, Councillor Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, and I guess the question for me to the applicant now is just given the discussion at committee here is what is preferred? A two-story parking with a setback at the rear, or a minimum parking amount, adhering to the minimum of the bylaw. I heard what Tim Mark said, and I guess I was given different information. So glad that Mr. Mark clarified that information about the rear wall underneath the ground. I wasn't aware of that. So it seems to me that the discussion now is whether that setback at the rear makes the most sense or adhering to the minimum parking, given the discussion that we're hearing at committee. Is there a preference from the applicant on either of those?
Well, I would just again state, I think the purpose of the minimum parking is to increase soil depth for the trees, I don't think it's actually going to change that. So if the purpose is just to reduce parking, again, I think I would defer to the client. I know he can accept the 7.5 or 3.5 meter setback from the parking garage because it would render the parking garage, in my opinion, useless. And so there would be no point in moving forward. So I'm not sure how you want to answer that.
I think as Rod stated, the correlation between the lesser parking stalls still doesn't solve the traffic. So the ramp issue and the lot line. So I don't think that's a solution that solves the other. So we certainly need that ramp at the rear lot line. And I mean, our preference would be the amount of stalls that we have proposed, just based on the experience we had with 28 Victoria around this similar issue. But I suppose if we had to choose, it would be the parking stalls over a ramp for sure.
Okay, thank you for that, Chair. That's helpful. I would, Chair, I think it does make sense to take a 5-minute break if you have your purview, obviously, but that might help in this case.
Thanks. I'm going to go back to Councillor Kelly.
Sorry, I guess this question might be for you, Chair, just because I don't think anyone here is an expert on whether or not trees will be able to grow in soil. And we're saying that we're hearing from both scenarios here. So is there someone in the room with expertise who can actually answer this question definitively before we cast a vote? Because I feel if I had to vote now, I wouldn't know. I'd have to take somebody's word for it.
I'm going to suggest that, it would take an architect to tell us whether or not, if you remove that 3.5 meters on the back, or whether you just, somehow reconfigure the parking for fewer spots, whether there would be the physical space for the ramp. You have Mr. Leahy's assertion that isn't possible. If there were no parking at all, of course, you would have no problem with retaining soil depth in the rear yard. I don't know if city staff have anyone who can speak authoritatively to the constructability of a parking garage with, say, a 3.5 meter setback. Sorry.
Mr. Chair, can't necessarily speak authoritatively, but certainly we do recognize that when you are doing any kind of a subsurface structure or any kind of foundation work, there is a area of disturbance around that. So with respect to the retention of a tree, if that is the aim, we would find that likely a significant challenge for that. Regardless, we think that the suggestion is proposed to look at this issue further in site plan and see if there are any conditions that might be put in place to provide for additional soil volume or soil depth is one that that staff can take away and think about, with appreciation, of course, that we cannot receive direction under site plan, so we would take that as a request.
Or if I could, maybe I'm confused myself there, or Sir Councillor Kelly. I think we have an opportunity through design to have proper soil depth in a planter or a semi-recessed planter to allow for tree growth. And we will be supplying details from a qualified landscape architect to ensure that future trees will be able to grow in a properly structured planter, properly watered planter, all those things. So I think I'm very comfortable. And I think the planning department, I think will defer to the expertise that can take place. I think the question regarding the 3 meters, I think about setting it back to allow existing trees, that's a different issue. So.
I just want to follow up with Mr. Wise quickly, just to be very clear about the answer that you just gave. Did you say that any changes to the footprint of the parking garage would not have a material effect on the ability of trees to grow or survive within this property?
Chair, the issue with respect to the viability of trees, either small canopy trees, medium canopy trees, large canopy trees, size trees, something that is currently under investigation by our natural systems team. As part of that urban forest management planning work, we are looking into the development of specifications and best practice guidance for these as part of that UFMP work. It's within our department work plan. There are, of course, industry best practices that exist right now. So from our perspective right now, the issue is with respect to what is the best opportunity within that design to maximize the available soil volume to achieve the kind of canopy coverage that we're looking for. With respect to whether or not that results in viability for this particular design, the policies in the official plan do relate to the input of a landscape architect to provide that guidance. So I'm not going to give you a hard and firm answer here, but the natural systems are aware. We are looking at that. It is a work plan item. And of course, we're in consultation with the landscape architect about this specific site.
So we don't know. And again, I'm hearing that there's enough soil to support the trees, but we're still going with planter boxes. So as a lay person, I'm incredibly confused and making this decision difficult, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah, so I am proposing we take a quick break, but the intent behind the motion is to guarantee through a zoning amendment that the wall of the parking garage would be far enough away from the property line that there would be deep soil in order to support a large, mature canopy tree, right? And we're seeing lots of I want to call them mid-rise trees. Good Lord. Mid-rise trees. You know, but we're not seeing a lot of big, mature canopy trees in the urban area, and we know the effect that those canopy trees have on mitigating things like heat island effects. If we want to guarantee that there is going to be sufficient soil depth for that big, mature tree, then we need to do something in zoning, because we don't have any control over site plan that guarantees that soil is going to be there. The motion as it is currently written doesn't actually guarantee that it would be the wall would be any further away from the property line. But I think the intent is that by limiting the number of parking spots that the wall can be brought in. And then, of course, we have the assertion on the part of the applicant that you don't need to bring in the wall, that they are going to be able to put trees of very significant size into the space that is back there. The crux of the disagreement is going to be whether or not those are big, mature canopy trees, you know, the giant oaks, et cetera, or whether it's not. You know, I see a few paths forward, and I'm sorry, I see your hand, Councillor Dudas, but I'll just finish the thought. I want to take a break after Councillor Dudas has an opportunity to ask her questions of the applicant, but we could either choose to withdraw this motion and do something for council. We can impose this condition, potentially with a modification that we say exactly where we want the wall to be in order to ensure that there is sufficient soil depth, and then take our chances. I do think it is within our purview to say, in the interest of ensuring adequate soil to grow large trees, we are forcing that garage back. That may challenge our constructability of the garage, which has its own challenges. So we've got a few different paths ahead of us. Councillor Dudas, please go ahead and ask your question, and we'll take a 5-minute break and come at it fresh.
Yes, it's less of a question. I did want to pose this thought to give time during the break for whether it's the move or the motion. But Chair, you brought it up. The intent of the motion in the therefore be resolved does not correlate with the intention of soil or trees. It speaks only about minimum parking. And, you know, despite whereases, which are just fodder, really, like in emotion, in the context of process, they're the background, they're the narrative, but it is the therefore be it resolved that we are passing. And my concern is with that, we're listening to various experts in different fields say it has an impact, it doesn't have an impact. I have difficulty supporting the motion as it is standing right now because it doesn't correspond for me to the intent of soil preservation and trees and preservation. So I'm laying that thought forward. If it can be revised, or say, for instance, it's taken off the table and it comes back for council and it has a better, deeper connection for the intention of it. I don't like supporting things with intentions attached that aren't clearly defined, because by law, we are enforcing something that is written down. So that is my concern. I'm putting that forward. I'm happy to chat about that after the break, but I wanted to pose that as one of my sticking points.
I think that's all very legitimate, Councillor Dudas. Thank you very much. Let's take 10 minutes and we'll come back at this. Thank you very much for coming back and reacting to the motion. We have quorum, so I'll get the meeting back underway. We're going to pretend Councillor Kitts is in her seat. She's listening. Do a sub quorum. Good. So Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chair. So after a great discussion from committee and strong indication for how committee would like to proceed in support of mutual outcomes of trees and housing, we're going to withdraw the motion and come back at council with something that is a bit further refined. And, you know, I certainly would invite the applicant, considering your commitment to preserving those trees, to perhaps work with the local councillor and myself between now and then to get this motion right, so that we can get something in zoning as appropriate for our official plan purposes and still maintain the integrity of your development and your contribution to the community. Thank you so much.
Councillor, thank you very much. So that motion is withdrawn. And I just echo Councillor Johnson. If you know, if there is not some solution that would allow a very, you know, large mature tree or a couple of big large mature trees back there by council, I'll happily bring that motion back with a 3.5 meter setback. I do believe that council has every right to insist on creating that space for trees, but we will take a look at that over the next couple of weeks. And I know Councillor Menard will be working closely with you on this one. So thank you very much for a good discussion around trees. I don't want anyone to be under the impression that this was an attempt to stop density. I think, as I talk to my colleagues around the table, we all want to see this mid-rise here with this density in this great location, but we do want to ensure that we are prioritizing trees over parking in our evolving city. So thank you for a good discussion, colleagues. I don't think there are any further questions for staff. So are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrew and Eric, for your work on that. Thank you very much to the applicants for a good process thus far. We'll move on to our next presentation, which is our presentation and decision, which is aligning the zoning bylaw 2008-250 with Bill 23. Carol and Robert. And I've asked them to make a full presentation on this one. It gets complex, and I just want to make sure the members fully understand what we'll be approving today, if we do approve it. Robert, we're in your hands.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members of committee. Let's just wait for the slides to come up. There we go. So we are here today to discuss zoning bylaw amendments in relation to Bill 23 and the requirements that it set out for additional dwelling units on urban residential lots. So just to quickly review, last year, the province passed Bill 23. One of the major impacts that it had on zoning was that on any parcel of urban residential land containing a detached dwelling, semi-detached dwelling, or townhouse dwelling is now required to permit up to 2 additional units for a total of 3 units on the lot. It also stipulated that any zoning regulations that directly prevent those additional units from being established are effectively of no force and effect. So in that extent, the element of allowing 3 units on a lot is really a formality in that sense. Can we have the next slide, please? So this is just to give a visual generally of what was permitted before Bill 23 was passed and what is permitted today. Prior to Bill 23, City of Ottawa zoning bylaw permitted basically up to 1 additional unit that either could come in the form of, at the top, a secondary dwelling unit, which we see basically in the principal building, or as a separate building, which we call a coach house, shown in the lower left there. It could have one or the other, not both. Post Bill 23, you're required to allow either both one additional unit in the building and a coach house, or 2 additional units in the building for a total of 3 units on the site. So this is how it would look in the case of a detached dwelling. Next slide, please. And now in a semi-detached dwelling. So the same is true in the case of each half of a semi-detached dwelling. You're required to allow those 2 additional units. They could come in the form of a coach house. You don't see that in our diagrams here because except in the exceptionally large lots, generally there's not enough space on the lot to really meet the current requirements with respect to setback and sizing of coach house. So in most cases, you'd generally see it manifest itself as 2 additional units in each half of the semi-detached, and for a total of 6 dwelling units. So anywhere where a semi-detached dwelling is permitted, such as the R2, R3, R4, and R5 zones, this effectively means that in a building, one could have up to six units in that building, counting the additional units. Next slide, please. And similar to a townhouse permitted in the R3 zones and up. So each individual townhouse unit could have up to 3 units in it total for 3 times however many townhouse units it is. So 9 units and up effectively in the R3 and up. Next slide, please. And these slides just basically kind of show mapping of like how much density and how many units were contemplated prior to Bill 23. So anything that's R1 zoned in the city, generally no more than 2 units, counting the secondary unit that's permitted. R2, 4 units, R4 and up, obviously more than that, because there's a bit more flexibility in those zones. Next slide. And this is post Bill 23. So in general, R1 zones, no less than 3 units, provided they're fully serviced residential lots. And once you get to R2, which permits semis, we are now talking effectively up to 6 units when you factor in 3 units being allowed in both halves of a semi. So R2 and up is 6 units or more as the zoning increases. Next slide, please. So the amendments required do include basically the following, and these are what's basically required to actually implement Bill 23 itself. So the first one is to replace the existing secondary unit section and coach houses, which are section 133 and 142 in the current bylaw, with a single additional dwelling unit section. Basically, the intent of that being that like all of those requirements pertinent to Bill 23 can be found in one place in the bylaw. So it is to effect allowing 3 units total on a fully serviced residential lot. With respect to coach houses, which are separate buildings on the site, existing regulations on size, setback, and height are proposed to be currently retained as is, but moved into that new combined section. Next slide. It's a little bit out of order. This was earlier on. Next slide, please. There are also further amendments as per the directions report, which this committee heard last month. So these are the amendments that are not strictly necessary to affect what was required under Bill 23, but in staff's opinion represent direct implications of Bill 23 that we feel are necessary to implement its intent. So those are, with respect to the bylaw, removing existing limits in section 133 on the maximum floor area of a unit, which currently limit above ground ADUs to 40% of the building. I would note that the limits on bedrooms per unit, which is generally in most cases 4 bedrooms per unit and no more, will remain. There is a requirement also in section 133 with respect to entranceways in the front wall of a building. We're proposed to take those restrictions out such that there's basically full flexibility on where entrances can be located for additional units. Next slide, please. And the other major issue that we brought to committee last month with the directions report was with relation to rear yard parking and landscaping. The reason for this is that in most cases in the residential zones, there are no regulations limiting the use of rear yards in residential zones for parking. So the thing to keep in mind when you see these regulations today under the zoning bylaw, one could hypothetically pave 100% of their rear yard for parking. If they so wished, there'd be nothing in zoning that would prevent that. So the following regulations are proposed essentially as an interim measure to get some sort of regulation on that while the new zoning bylaw is under development. And there's two regulations proposed. No more than 70% of the rear yard can be reserved for a parking area in the rear yards. That includes everything for parking, the parking spaces, any driveways and aisles accessing those spaces. In addition, a requirement that at least 15% of the rear yard area be softly landscaped. So soft landscaping referring to basically vegetative space, grass, sod, etc. Transition clause is proposed basically for applications that were filed basically so that prior to the date of this amendment so that they're reviewed in accordance with the regulations in effect when they were applied. Next slide. So this is just a visual of what the 70% and the 15% might look like. So 70% does provide some measure of flexibility in terms of providing a rear yard parking area, as you can see there, while ensuring that some amount of space is provided. In a lot of cases, you'll see it abutting like one or more of the lot lines, as you'll see in the diagram there, basically to ensure that there is some degree of landscaped area where presently in most cases, none is required. And I believe this is the last slide. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. I saw councillors jumping in, keen to ask questions, but we do have delegations. So I'm going to turn first to Robert Brinker with the Federation of Citizens Associations. Is Robert online? Robert, we're just bringing you in. There you are. And Robert, you're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that.
Whenever you're ready.
Hello, Chair and members of the Planning Committee. As you know, the FCA Planning and Zoning Committee would like to make some comments regarding the Bill 23 implementation into the current zoning bylaw. As we said 2 weeks ago, or the last time we spoke at the recommendations report, we support the lifting of the 30% rule for accessory units, and it gives a real chance to create livable additional dwelling units. One of our concerns, the allowing on entrances to the accessory units on the front of the building will allow greater access for residents with mobility needs. We understand in some of the older neighborhoods there is some concern about streetscapes, but we see that the benefit for mobility use is of a greater impact. Shared single entrance would be our preferred solution, but we understand it's not always feasible to implement. Rear yard parking, you know, rear yard parking is a hot topic for most of our members, as vulnerable green space is disappearing at a rapid pace in our city. It is understood that there is currently no limitation at all, and therefore any intermediate restriction is better than none at all. 70% for parking driveway, a minimum of 15% landscaping, and the rest for hard landscaping doesn't satisfy anyone here, not the communities nor the industry. Therefore, our goal is to find a permanent solution for the new comprehensive zoning bylaw, which balances the need for parking, green space, soil volume, and space for trees and amenity spaces going forward. As I mentioned before, we would like to thank you and the zoning group with Carol Rudy, David Wise, and Robert Sanders Scott for the open discussion between staff, industry, presented by GOBA and us. Thank you, Chair.
Robert, thank you very much. I don't see any questions. I'll editorialize and just say I agree with everything you said.
Thank you.
Our next presenter with that, Jason Burgraff with the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Association. I apologize for that. A little salt and pepper. Ms. Burgraff, you have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to even try to be quicker than Robert Brinker. Very short and sweet, guys. Let's just get on with this. It's been a number of months to get to this point. FCA is on board, GOBA's on board, staff are on board in this direction for this interim measure to get us through to the next comprehensive zoning bylaw. Let's just go. Thanks very much. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burgraff. I don't see any questions, but if I may just editorialize a bit, I agree with what you've said. Dave Coyle is with the Riverside Park Community Association. Oh, I'm sorry. So those are the only 2 delegations we have. Are there any questions of staff? Councillor Troster?
Promise I'll be fast because we've been here for a while. I understand we're currently waiting to hear back from the federal government about our Housing Accelerator Fund application. So this is something I've discussed with Chair Leeper, but I just want to get it on the record. Other cities have been asked to bring in 4 units as of right rather than 3. Do we anticipate this request being made in Ottawa? And why are we not just doing that now? Thank you.
Chair, the conversations that we're having between the Housing Accelerator Fund, CMHC, those are conversations that are having held at a different level. So I'm not privy to talk about them. Regardless, we do have the zoning bylaw process that is underway. So that is something that is going to be significant and significantly a change from the densities that we have now. This is an interim move that is very much in alignment with where we were going anyway. And as part of that discussion, when we go forward, the idea of 4-unit cap, those will be things that we'll be bringing back to council for their consideration as we work our way through that full rewrite process.
Okay, so you're saying 3 units now, potential of 4 after we look at the full zoning bylaw amendment. But what's our recourse? Like, what if the government comes back to us and says no money unless you adopt 4 units as of right? If we pass this now, do we have to amend it again? Or do we lose the opportunity to amend it again? I'm just wondering if that happens, what we do.
Through the chair. So we have consulted on the amendments that are before you. We haven't consulted on 4 units. So if we were to have to, at the direction of council, initiate an amendment to permit 4 units per residential lot, we would have to undertake a new consultation process and circulate draft provisions, which I may add would basically partially duplicate the work that we've had underway for 2 years now and are about to launch in March of next year. So I'm hoping that we're not asked to specifically do an amendment on 4 units because we're going to be providing broader permissions as part of the new zoning bylaw that will achieve that intent.
Okay, I'll just register my concern because this is a request that's being made very strongly from other cities as a condition of receiving millions and millions of dollars, which we desperately need to build affordable housing in the city. So I guess we'll just wait and see. But I would hope that should the government make that request or demand that we can move quickly, understanding that a lot of money is on the line for the city. That's really important to us. Thank you.
I'll ask that, but let me ask Councillor Johnson first.
Thank you. Quickly, Chair. So we've registered some correspondence from the City View Community Association late last night, and I just wanted to clarify on behalf of my communities with respect to these zoning changes. One, could you just reiterate for the record that this is an interim solution and that there are greater consultative processes underway over the next 3 years with the comprehensive zoning bylaw that will get us to a place of a permanent zoning provision?
Thank you, Chair. So what I can say to that is, with respect to consultation, as with any other zoning amendment, there was a full circulation that was done citywide to all registered community associations when this was first circulated back in March. The intent with any measures that aren't strictly required to implement Bill 23 is very much, as we said, an interim solution, particularly with respect to the rear yard parking issue. It's basically while the new zoning bylaw is under development, ensuring that there is a requirement in play in rear yards where presently no requirement exists. And today one could hypothetically pave in a neighborhood such as City View 100% of the rear yard if they so wished.
Okay, great. So there was some consultation to get us to this point, and then for the larger comprehensive zoning bylaw review, there's open houses underway right now, and we'll continue the conversation for the next 3 years. And then you've kind of already answered my second piece. So with the 70% rear yard parking, I think, yeah, if you're less familiar maybe with the current zoning, that might look like a very high number, but in fact, for ongoing concerns with on-site stormwater management and natural drainage, would this zoning provision be better or worse than what is currently in existence?
At the end of the day, Chair, there is no regulation right now saying that you can't have more than a certain amount of space of your rear yard paved. The one rule that I can think of states that all areas not of the rear yard not covered by parking must be landscaped, but that just says not covered by parking. It doesn't say how much, which again hypothetically means you could pave it all today.
Okay, so the suggestion then is that this 15% of soft landscaping is in fact an improvement on-site stormwater management, perhaps than what was currently in place. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out a couple of quick things. First, Councillor Troster, to her point, it's very frustrating. And Councillor Johnson, which is now a wonderful rep with FCM as well now, we're struggling as municipalities. We feel that the federal government keeps saying, look, we want to dole out money, but the application processes aren't being filled in correctly, which is in my mind, a little bit bonkers. We have some of the best teams in the city of Ottawa, and I want to make sure that they understand they're doing a terrific job. I have an application that we've been working on for several years, senior, Indigenous, low-income housing with a food cupboard. You think this checks every box on the list, but clearly they don't want to release the funds. And without any disrespect to my very good friend, and he is, Mayor Josh Morgan in London, when the federal government gets out front and says, we have all this money to unlock municipalities, do your job. Well, we're doing our job. It's time to loosen up the wallet, purse strings, whatever you want to call them, and start getting the money out there if they truly believe that we deserve and need this extra housing. So it's kind of a message. I'm throwing something over the bow there. People kind of know my background, but I'm also very cognizant of the fact we're doing what we have to do on our side. And I will give a tip of the hat to MP Mona Fortier that I even had a call yesterday with that says, yes, we keep filling in these applications. We have applications that match exactly or better than what the applications are. We got to find a better way to be able to turn on these streams and get them going. And I'm hearing it from 2,000 plus member municipalities across the country. I know that's a bit of a monologue, Chair Leeper, but I felt it had to be included in the conversation if we actually want to get some housing in place.
It's an important monologue. Thank you, Tim. And I don't want to pile on, but I think we heard our staff speak not just to the increase in number of units to 3 on lots, but in R2s and R3s, a significantly greater intensification than 3. It has taken us a year to get to this point. I imagine that there are any number of considerations that staff would like to have in this bylaw that are not, because we have not had time to sort of comprehensively and holistically think about them. This is an interim measure, and it's taken us a year to get to that point to increase to 3. I would not like to think that hundreds of millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars in housing affordability fund money is going to be only unlocked if we undertake to do another interim measure to get us to 4 units instead of 3. This set of bylaw amendments will get us quickly to 3 units compared to one on many lots, and even greater intensification across much of the city. I think the municipality is doing what it needs to do. We've demonstrated that we are going to double down on intensification, and it is critical that we start receiving those federal housing dollars today to start addressing the real crisis that we have on our streets. So I'm pleased to pass this set of amendments today. I'm very much looking forward to seeing a draft bylaw on the comprehensive zoning bylaw review in March, and we'll go from there. I don't have any further questions of staff on this one. Do any members of committee? Seeing none, is the report recommendation approved, carried?
Carried.
Thank you very much. Staff, thank you. I know that was a lot of work in a very short time frame, and there's still a lot more work to do. Appreciate it. Which moves us to our last substantive item today, which is the Ottawa Community Lands Development Corporation 2022 Annual Report. This is just for our receiving, but I did want to ask staff to make a presentation for those members who may not be completely familiar with what OCLDC is.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair and members of Planning Committee. My presentation will take you through a brief history behind the creation of the OCLDC, its mandate and its accomplishments to date, and a summary of the achievements for the corporation in 2022. Next slide, please. Prior to creating the OCLDC, staff from the Corporate Real Estate Office undertook a best practices analysis by surveying how other jurisdictions were handling their surplus real estate, and conducted a best practices analysis to look at how to unlock the value of its surplus lands. Staff found that the overarching approach was to ensure that both financial and non-financial goals and objectives of the cities were being met when surplus assets were being disposed of. The OCLDC mandate was informed by this process and is focused on balancing the financial and non-financial goals of the City of Ottawa, which can be summarized as financial, social, cultural, and environmental objectives. The quadruple bottom line embraces initiatives such as promoting affordable housing, environmentally sustainable development, and creating live, work, play communities and innovative design, development designs. In addition, the OCLDC was created in 2007 to implement the Longfields Development Plan, a 50-hectare subdivision in Barrhaven, and the Centrepoint Town Center Plan, which is focused around the Baseline Transit Station and Ben Franklin Place. Next slide, please. The benefits of the OCLDC are that it separates the city's role as landowner and real estate developer from its planning authority role under the Municipal Act and Planning Acts. The OCLDC can act as a developer and enter into subdivision agreements with the City of Ottawa. The corporation can also enter into agreements with purchasers of surplus land, and it provides additional control to ensure the city's objectives are met. The OCLDC can sell, lease, or encumber all or part of the development corporation sites to further city goals and objectives. Like the Longfields Development Plan, the corporation can subdivide and develop or redevelop city-owned properties. And finally, the OCLDC can acquire and hold land for future projects. Next slide, please. With regards to the structure of the OCLDC, it is a nonprofit entity governed by the Corporations Act. The board consists of 6 directors, 4 of which are members of council, and 2 non-council members who have extensive private sector experience. The offices are from the city's senior management team, consisting of the city manager, Wendy Stephenson, who is president and CEO, Mr. Cyril Rogers, who is the treasurer and CFO, Mr. Peter Radke sitting beside me, who is the secretary and COO, and acting director of the real estate department. And a new addition for this term of council is Mr. Paul Levine, who is the director of housing services. Next slide, please. The City of Ottawa is the only shareholder of the corporation, and all of its activities are undertaken only in accordance with the objectives and development plans approved by council. including the approval of its budgets and the approval of the transfer of surplus lands that are to be disposed of by the OCLDC. Next slide, please. The next two slides I will take you through will provide some examples of OCLDC projects to date. The slide you're looking at right now provides a few examples from the Longfields demonstration plan that was overseen by the OCLDC. You will notice the variety of building typologies that were included in the subdivision, ranging from semi-detached courtyard townhomes and multi-res and mixed-use buildings, and including some real lane products. Urban design guidelines were enforced by the OCLDC and set the stage for a high-quality product that embraced features like front porches and the creation of an inviting pedestrian realm. As part of this development, a transit courtyard, which you will see on the bottom of the slide in the middle, will be delivered by the home builder at the current Longfields transit station, which is completed. The courtyard will be completed as part of a future development by the purchaser of these lands. The responsibility for constructing the station was secured through the sale of these lands. Next slide, please. This slide demonstrates some recent sales in transit-oriented development areas like the city of Canada, like the Canada Town Center, shown in the top left corner of the slide. This site is within 600 meters of the Canada Bus Transit Station. On the top right is a site adjacent to the Saint Laurent Shopping Center, and also within 600 meters of the Saint Laurent LRT station. And on the bottom of the slide is a TOD site at Lion and Albert Streets in the downtown core. This site will include a privately owned public space, also known as POPs. On the bottom right of your slide, that will be the POP. The OCLDC was able to secure 7 affordable units for a period of 20 years as part of this development. All of the above developments will include a variety of units ranging from 1 to 3 bedroom units. The 1209 Saint Laurent project is intended to be funded by CMHC, and in order to qualify for its funding, will have to meet CMHC eligibility requirements. Next slide, please. And lastly, this slide summarizes the OCLDC accomplishments for 2022. It was a successful year for the corporation, with 2 sales totaling over $10 million, of which $1.8 million was directed to the Affordable Housing Reserve. One of the sales was to a local builder, the Berge Patry Limited, and the other to a Montreal-based developer, EMD Batimo. Both projects will include rental units, with Batimo building a 7- and 9-story rental apartment building with 350 units, with ground floor service commercial space abutting Canada Avenue. And the Berge Patry development is proposing a 6-story building with over 300 units, ranging in sizes from 1 to 3 bedroom units. In its 14 years since being incorporated, the OCLDC has generated over $108 million for the City of Ottawa. It has provided an above-average annual net dividend to the City of Ottawa, thereby exceeding its expectations. It has facilitated an estimated $10 million plus annual property tax revenue from the sale of surplus lands. It has sold 40 strategic properties, has supported the creation of over 2,800 new residential units, and has provided land for affordable housing and generated over $6.2 million for the Affordable Housing Reserve. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Councillor Dudas has some questions for you.
I think it's just probably one question. One of the mandates of OCDLC is acquisition of land. We know that the cost of properties is not going down. But one of the things that I was missing, it might have been deeper in the report, is what amount of money is being set aside from sales for future expropriations or acquisitions? There might be property. I can think of one instance in the core in the last term of council where we had to purchase land to provide space for I believe it was a public park. So I'm just curious as to what percentage or how do you calculate what money is set aside from these sales to put towards acquisition?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Currently, no money is set aside for acquisition. All money is transferred back to the City of Ottawa, and it goes into the surplus housing account. We do net out 25% when the zoning is applicable for affordable housing, as Mr. Nirmal highlighted. We also net out 25% now for a parkland reserve fund, and the remaining monies go into, again, the surplus housing account. The way, the real estate office is set up at the city is we rely on client groups to come to us with a budget to say, we need to buy 3 acres of land for a fire station, or we need to buy X number of acres of land for a community center. And it's the client group that puts together the actual business case to then go before council or to put forward a budget to secure the funds.
Okay. Has it ever been considered doing it where there is a pocket of money put aside for that? I'm just, once again, I'm thinking of, there's been park acquisitions. You mentioned the new fire station and training center that will eventually have to be acquired. Thinking of LRT, future land acquisitions. Has that ever been considered as part of maybe a more not trying to say prudent, but maybe a more of a safe way of pocketing aside some money to set aside for these acquisitions?
That would basically be a decision for council, Mr. Chair, to direct staff to set aside funds for future acquisitions.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Chair. Sorry, could you clarify how many affordable units in the Lion Street property?
There were 7 units.
7.
That's right.
Okay, so I want to be really clear. This is not affordable housing. This is a luxury apartment building. It is beautiful. They are developing a park for us, which will be beautiful, which we did work with the Public Realm Committee, the Community Association. But this again underlines the absolute inadequacy of the rental construction financing initiative, because those 7 apartments out of a massive tower are going to be 90% of average market rent, which I must remind you is $2,100 a month right now for a 1-bedroom in downtown Ottawa. So I was really pleased to with Multi-Faith Housing Initiative and Nepean Housing for the Longfields development. That's really great. But that was initiated in 2009. I'm just wondering, do you have any other projects in the pipe, nonprofit development?
4 land is transferred to the land development corporation. It is circulated internally. That's when we would partner with our 4 section and have to discuss with them, hey, would this land be more appropriate for affordable housing? And if they're hand and say yes, we'd like to reserve this to provide to an provider, and it basically goes to Paul Levine's group, and then they dispose of it through their RFO process.
Opportunities to dispose of land to non-providers in the future?
Mr. Chair, I would defer that question to services, but I would say every piece of property that we circulate, we will talk to services, and if that means every property that they think should be going to affordable housing, it'll all go down that.
Okay, just land is one of the assets we have, and land is one of the greatest ways in our city. And just to the statistics that as of right now, in units of affordable housing have been created by private developers. So, but thank you very much.
Their 16th meeting? Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in regards to Ottawa community housing. Is there any consideration for surplus lands to be given to housing? I didn't see that. Is this a consideration?
Process, I circulate the lands in service. They have the relationship with the state, so they would put up their hand to say, hey, this would be a piece of property that OCH could develop, and then there'd be we have a good relationship with every OCH also.
But
Housing Services puts up their, we don't necessarily ask them who's going to get it. I think they go through process to determine who should get the surplus land in housing. So I think OCH probably competes with multi-faith and the other affordable housing providers in the city.
But but being a sole shareholder OCH, it's not first consideration.
Not from the housing service affordable, and then I would leave it to that.
Okay, so we talked. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Great. Thank you, Chair. I wanted to point out for a quick second, I want to thank the lands community because we've done this for years. City land that we disposed of to non-profits and Indigenous senior housing and a food. Would that not check every single box that should allow us to be able to get funding through a federal government envelope, or even ourselves? I know we've contributed, over $1 million to get this. Doing every municipality they're requesting. I want to see. Do you think we're getting any? Because I feel like I'm just, hitting my head on time on something that we're trying to achieve.
Can you repeat the question, Councillor? I don't quite understand what the question was there.
Question is, so much effort, I think it was 4 years ago, to dispose of this land, knowing that we wanted a provider to come in to be able to use this land to build more housing, affordable housing. Not that what we're doing is not actually getting achieved because the federal government's not actually contributing.
But I think the project you're referring to, Mr. Chair, we can't take credit for. That was done through housing services. So I wouldn't say the real estate office is frustrated with it, because once housing services gets the land, it's their project to.
I get the silos. I understand the silos, but it is our land. And like Councillor Troster says, land value is our greatest asset. And if the federal government isn't recognizing that, is that not, like, I know you have to wear 2 caps and work in silos, but is this not frustrating? Like, if we have a plan to use our lands for value to create housing, is there no frustration that it's actually achieving what it's supposed to do? And I'll continue to support it. I just find it kind of awkward.
I haven't felt that frustration, Mr. Chair, but I think that's just because, again, I haven't been involved in that aspect through the city. So I don't think I can really comment on that.
Fair enough. And I'm putting you into a political box, and we'll leave the politicians do what we have to do. But at the same time, I'm frustrated. I see some faces on here that are frustrated, and we want to send a signal to the federal and provincial governments. We're doing our best. Stop telling us we're not. We are actually trying to create affordable housing, and you should help support municipalities. We're not creatures of the province, and we need to be able to get some affordable housing built. And every time we do the application processes, multiple times, I feel we need to have one win, and we haven't had one yet. So another monologue. Chair Leeper, I apologize for that.
It's like, no, I won't go there. Thank you very much, Councillor Tierney. So I don't see any other questions. So I just want to run through the process really briefly. The city owns land. Corporate real estate has got the sort of overall vision into that. When it's determined that it's time to dispose of land, real estate makes that available to other city departments. Could be housing services, could be the fire department, could be parks and rec. If none of those bodies step up and want that land, then city council will vote to put that land into the hands of the Ottawa Lands Development Corporation, which is a separate corporation. 3 of us here today sit on that corporation, but council votes to put it into that group's hands for disposal. The Ottawa Lands Development Corporation then puts that land on the market, subject to potential conditions that help it to achieve its mandate. So it may put it on the open market looking for the best bids for a project that best achieves affordable housing goals or 15-minute community goals or some of the other goals that we have. The market, somebody on the market purchases that land from Ottawa Lands Development Corporation. That generates revenue for the corporation that then goes, after its expenses, goes into the city's coffers. 25% of the land, the market proceeds for lands that are zoned residential go into our housing fund. But there is a significant chunk of money that also goes into general coffers, I believe. And we have a target, I believe, as a corporation for how much money we are expected to contribute to the city's budget. What was the 2023 target?
Mr. Chair, the 2023 target for the Land Development Corporation is $5.5 million. We also do just general disposals where they're not necessarily strategic pieces of land, but maybe former rights of way or lands that, once we purchased it and used it for a use, we had some leftover land where we just do general disposals through our office. And so that target normally, or in the past, has been 1.5 million. This year it was bumped up to 2.2 million, sorry, to 2.5 million.
Okay.
Or 2 million, I think. Yeah. So we're 7.5 million total.
7.5 million?
Yes.
That was the targeted number in the 2023 budget. And I think what I want to emphasize, what I want to emphasize for members of council is that it is up to us as a council to determine how much money we expect Ottawa Land Development Corporation to raise. So if we want lands predominantly put into the hands of our not-for-profit housing providers, for instance, that's just a foregone revenue on the part of council. So we'll ask you this year in the 2024 budget, when we table the budget, we'll see how much revenue you are expected to achieve. And council has the opportunity to reduce that expectation, if it so chooses, in pursuit of other goals. Is that an accurate way to put it?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. So something to think about when we say, why isn't this land just going into the hands of our not-for-profit housing partners? Oftentimes it's because we also have a revenue target for Ottawa Land Development Corporation for funds that would go into general coffers that could be used elsewhere in our budget. So yes, we can give away land to our not-for-profit housing partners, but council does have to know that that money is going to have to be made up for somewhere else. If it were up to me, we would have no revenue target for OLDC at all, and all of our lands would go into the hands of not-for-profit housing partners. But that is something you might want to pay attention to in the course of this year's budget, is to take a look at the revenue expectations from OLDC. Yeah, it's monologues today. Anyone else want to make a monologue? Catherine's got her hands up.
I don't have a monologue, but you said that it goes into general coffers, but you had said it goes into a surplus housing account.
Mr. Chair, so we have an affordable housing policy that says for sale of city lands, 25% of net revenues goes into an affordable housing reserve fund. And now we have a parkland fund also. So 25% of revenues we generate go into that fund. So we're left with 50% that goes towards the overall city budget.
Oh, so that part does go into general.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for that clarifying question, not a monologue, but good clarifying question. The, and some of the, and of course, the work of the OLDC is done behind closed doors because we're dealing with competitively sensitive information. But, hypothetically, we could have a parcel of land on which we want the bidders to promise us that they're going to build 25% affordable units. If we, as a corporation, determined that they should provide us with 50%, that's something we can do, but it will reduce the revenue that the market is willing to bid for that, because generally it's going into the hands of the private developers. So one important piece, I think, as we know, the mayor has a strong commitment to ensuring that we're leveraging city lands in the course of addressing our housing and homelessness crisis. So it's just another piece where we want to make sure that we're getting the balance right. If there are no other questions, is the, the annual report and audited financial statements received? Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We have no in-camera items. Are there any notices of motion? Any inquiries? We don't have any other business. We are adjourned with our next meeting on Wednesday, November the 1st. The October 18th meeting was canceled. We had better things to do that day.